Viruses. From influenza to the common cold, we've all had experiences with these nasty diseases. They're easy to catch, quickly transferring from one host to another through proximity or physical contact. This also means that viruses are easily spread, and if the number of infected grows beyond what is treatable, it can cripple the entire world's health infrastructure. Overrun hospitals, behavioral mandates, and constant death are all elements of a worldwide pandemic. It's no wonder why zombie outbreaks and lab-grown diseases are such common premises for horror movies and video games. Diseases are downright scary, and it's most likely because the world has been overtaken by disease on multiple occasions that makes them so frightening. The bubonic plague, the great influenza pandemic, and even the COVID-19 pandemic are all events that have wiped out significant portions of humanity. And if left unchecked, a viral disease might be able to wipe out every last one of us. Sure, you can take measures to keep yourself safe, but who's to say a mutation isn't out of the question? A disease altering its own biology to overcome resistance and continue its spread could be a germaphobe's nightmare, and have serious consequences for the entire world. Of course, we're still talking about ordinary diseases, but what about when the virus is anything but normal? What if it falls under the umbrella that could be termed anomalous? Enter the SCP Foundation. For them, anomalous viruses are some of the hardest to secure, contain, and protect the world from. It's not hard to imagine why, either. Containing viruses often involves the spread of safety precautions and information, sometimes distributions of vaccines and medicine. Basically, to stop a virus, people need to first know what they're dealing with. When you're operating under the veil of secrecy that the Foundation has to maintain, your options for information dispersal become a lot more complicated. Of course, by nature of being anomalous, the diseases the Foundation has to deal with are a lot stranger and definitely more dangerous than just another strain of the flu. Perhaps you're already familiar with SCP-008, the infectious disease codenamed the zombie plague that shuts down a victim's body and decays it heavily. But the SCP Foundation's Russian database has a deadly virus of its own. SCP-1007-RU is also known as the Nietzsche virus. It's nicknamed after the famous German philosopher who coined the term "God is dead" and explored themes of nihilism, an ideology that delves into the meaninglessness of life, the universe, and humanity's existence. If that doesn't clue you in that this anomaly is horrifying, then just wait until we dive into the file itself. SCP-1007-RU is, given its viral and infectious nature, kept in a high-security containment chamber intended to seal the anomaly away from the world. The chamber is outfitted with a triple airlock system that prevents accidental leakage and unwanted access. Entry into SCP-1007-RU's containment chamber comes with its own set of special containment procedures. Researchers must outfit themselves in an insulated protective suit that allows no material from inside the chamber to make contact with their body. Once their work with SCP-1007-RU is finished, they must take a sterilizing shower to watch any potentially lingering harmful particles from their body. And if that's not enough, they're forced into a 6-hour quarantine, isolated from the rest of the Foundation until their superiors are absolutely sure that they don't exhibit signs of infection. If personnel are by chance contaminated after contact with SCP-1007-RU, the Foundation takes their best interests into account and immediately euthanizes them, followed by a cremation of their remains to make sure all biological material is destroyed entirely, as harmful infectious agents may still persist on skin tissue and inside the body long after death has occurred. Yes, the containment procedures for SCP-1007-RU is immediate termination of a valuable Foundation employee. Those don't grow on trees either, and the Foundation definitely does not resort to this option very often. But this only demonstrates the severe threat that SCP-1007-RU poses to the Foundation's integrity. Perhaps losing one employee is better than the innumerable deaths caused by a full-scale outbreak of the anomaly. The area surrounding SCP-1007-RU's containment chamber, located in a facility kept inside the larger Foundation grouping of Zone 07, is also kept free of contamination by a high-temperature sterilization process. As a final security measure to keep SCP-1007-RU's containment as safe as it can possibly be. Since SCP-1007-RU is transmitted like most contagious viral diseases, via airborne, physical, and blood contact, the Foundation has made sure their containment procedures are as safe and tightly designed as possible. Since anyone who comes into contact with the anomaly is a carrier of it, all of the precaution is understandably necessary. But what is SCP-1007-RU, aside from a deadly infectious disease? What makes it anomalous and separates it from an ordinary virus? SCP-1007-RU specifically involves a multi-step mutation of neurons. If you don't already know, neurons are cells that transmit and receive nerve impulses throughout our bodies. Neurons respond to stimuli, sensations like touch, sound, light, and information from other cells. They're an essential part of our bodies and a necessary component for cells to communicate with one another. But most importantly, neurons help us feel pain. When SCP-1007-RU infects a subject, it changes their neurons over time to allow them to feel an increased threshold of pain tolerance, meaning that the victim can feel a more intense amount of pain before succumbing to death or losing consciousness. That almost sounds beneficial, right? If everyone had an increased pain tolerance, things like minor cuts or falling off your chair would barely register as harmful. But SCP-1007-RU has a disadvantageous trade-off that comes with its multi-step nature. As the virus mutates and changes, it does so in steps. But before each stage of cell mutation occurs, the victim experiences enough pain to completely overwhelm their pain tolerance threshold. SCP-1007-RU's initial incubation period lasts 2 to 4 hours, after which the virus will make its way through the central nervous system and to the brain. The victim experiences severe pain in line with their ordinary pain threshold and promptly loses consciousness. After they regain consciousness, the true horrors of SCP-1007-RU commence, and the anomaly begins to mutate their neurons and alter their existing pain thresholds to accommodate more stimuli. SCP-1007-RU seems to have an indefinite number of stages. If the victim can handle the pain, the infection will persist, and the neutrons will continue to mutate until they're unable to suffer anymore and die from the disease. Technically speaking, the virus is infinite and will go on until death occurs. But Foundation research has found that human subjects have only been able to reach, at most, the anomaly's 6th stage, after which they die. Not a single test subject has persisted to the 7th iteration of the virus, as it's believed to be too much pain for the human body to handle. But if a subject did reach these impossible pain thresholds, they most likely wouldn't last much longer. Curiously, when the Foundation experimented with SCP-1007-RU on a rat, it survived 9 stages into the anomaly. However, the pain was too much for the researchers to bear observing, and the decision was made to put the poor creature out of its misery shortly after. Each stage follows a similar pattern, allowing it to be predictably cataloged and measured across all test subjects. First, the subject will experience severe pain just below their current pain tolerance threshold. After 36 hours, the pain will intensify, growing larger and more harmful for the victim, until they finally lose consciousness. A few minutes later, when the subject has fully regained consciousness, the next stage begins, and the process repeats itself. Only this time, the pain threshold is increased. Over time, this process will continue to repeat itself and grow more deadly until the subject expires, dying from severe levels of pain beyond any of our comprehension. What makes the disease even worse to contract is that this pain is unable to be suppressed. The Foundation has certainly tried, from analgesics to tranquilizers, and surely some mimetic agents designed to reduce painful sensations, but nothing has had any effect on an individual infected by SCP-1007-RU. They are forced to endure the pain without any reprieve for a full 36 hours before passing out. They can't even lose consciousness before the stage ends, meaning that the only break from SCP-1007-RU is the few short minutes in between stages, all before the process repeats itself again and again. Interestingly, the inactive period between stages, labeled the quiescence period, seems to increase exponentially as time goes on. The first period ranges from 48 to 108 hours, where the subject feels completely ordinary before the next active stage occurs and their pain tolerance is increased. The Foundation typically does not like to prolong the pain of its test subjects beyond what's absolutely necessary to understand all elements of an anomaly. The moral issues that resulted from SCP-1007-RU's research were addressed in a statement by Overseer 05-4, which read, "Human experiments are performed only with the explicit permission of the Overseer Council. Any requests for experiments in which a subject would have to reach the 6th stage are rejected automatically. First, try to imagine such pain. But regardless, experiments involving SCP-1007-RU have been performed for the purposes of gaining all of this information, and the Foundation kept recorded transcripts of some of them. One interview, which was held 2 hours 12 minutes after the first exposure to the virus, and then held again at 2 hours and 17 minutes following infection, involved an interaction between Dr. Lungen and an unfortunate patient. First, the patient felt fine and asked if the researcher had infected them with something. When asked to describe how they felt, they exclaimed that they felt fine and had been sitting there for 2 hours feeling normal. Then the virus took root, and a howling scream filled the room. The patient began to sob and scream, feeling pain unlike anything else they had felt before. Pain they didn't know they were capable of feeling. They called for Dr. Lungen to stop the experiment, asking why this was happening to them. But Lungen's assistant called for the subject to be restrained and locked up. As the pain increased, they became desperate, confessing to the crimes they had committed prior to being imprisoned and drafted as a Foundation D-Class personnel, and begging the Foundation to stop. But even if the Foundation wanted to, they couldn't. There was nothing they could do but watch. Adhering to the procedure, Dr. Lungen calmly told the subject to relax themselves and asked where they were feeling the pain. But the subject continued to scream, barely able to get the words out. Their head, skin, heart, stomach, bones, and teeth, every last bit of their body was overwhelmed with nothing but pure pain. The subject begged and pleaded and struggled for hours until they eventually lost consciousness. Upon coming to, the subject asked what had happened, to which Dr. Lungen's assistant, junior researcher Kozmov, responded that he'll certainly remember in 2 days. Dr. Lungen was rightfully mortified by what he witnessed on that day and protested further experimentation with SCP-1007-RU. Lungen appeared before the Overseer Council and advocated for the destruction of the virus, but the O5s were unable to accommodate his request, as they had already severely limited the experiments and were unsure of how to take measures to eradicate the virus completely. Lungen withdrew from the SCP-1007-RU research project, and the position of research head was given to his assistant, junior researcher Kozmov. Despite Kozmov's inexperience and sadistic tendencies to prolong and observe experiences, Lungen was let go. However, Kozmov's psychological evaluation was still within the lines of what the Foundation considered acceptable, and he was given permission to have complete control over all SCP-1007-RU research materials. The file ends with a single note, written by Kozmov shortly after his promotion to research head. Permission has been granted for experiments involving humans up to stage 9. M.S. Kozmov. If you ever take a trip across the pond to some of the more rural parts of the British Isles, you might just hear some tales of a dark, shadowy shape, a creature stalking through the night, an omen of death. It's an entity that has been known by many names, including the Grim or Black Shuck. Most folks will tell you the same, that this nightmare takes on the form of a huge black dog, but is also known to be able to change its shape, often appearing at nighttime. The apparition is said to be demonic in nature, commonly associated with the devil himself, believed by some to be a hellhound like Garmr and Cerberus, guardians of the underworld in Norse and Greek mythology. The dog is far larger than your average pet, with big glowing eyes. It is also known to stalk crossroads, ancient pathways, and places where executions took place. Those who catch sight of Black Shuck are often befallen with bad luck, and for some it can even mean that death will soon be upon them. Of course, this is nothing more than a bit of local folklore, spooky tales designed to drum up tourism. But is the Black Shuck really just a legend, or is there something more to the tale? After all, it's not as if a dog like that could really exist, could it? Enter SCP-023, otherwise known as, yes, you guessed it, the Black Shuck. Much like the creatures from the stories, SCP-023 is an entity possessing a canine form, far larger than most domesticated dogs. SCP-023 is described as being shaggy in appearance, with black fur and glowing orange-red eyes, as well as prominent fangs. Through testing, the SCP Foundation has determined a number of the dog's anomalous abilities. First and foremost, legends have described the Black Shuck as an apparition or spirit, and much in the same vein, SCP-023 is able to pass right through solid matter. The creature can pass through walls seemingly at will, but does also seem to have a physical form, at least when it is kept in containment. To prevent a breach, the Foundation keeps SCP-023 in a walled-off intersection of 2 corridors, sporting fake doors at 3 of its 4 ends, with only one real entrance. Why does the dog's containment unit require such a specific layout? Simple. It has to resemble a crossroad, even if this is merely a superficial resemblance. Remember that the Black Shuck of legend often appeared at crossroads, a sign that would warn those traveling of their impending doom. As long as SCP-023 remains contained in the cell resembling crossroads, it cannot pass through walls. Should the Black Shuck ever escape this enclosure, however, then it will use its anomalous abilities to incinerate anything in its path. The dog can burn through walls no matter how dense, and will travel from location to location by this method. Also in keeping with the Shuck of folklore, looking into the eyes of SCP-023 can hold potentially devastating outcomes. Should any person make direct eye contact with the dog, then death will be upon them. Within the span of the next full year, either the person who looked at the Black Shuck in the eye or a close member of their family will die, just like a number of the legends state. The Foundation has no concrete idea how the Shuck chooses its victims, with no patterns or obvious preferences, only that they will die a year after eye contact. Researchers aren't even sure if SCP-023 selects its victims from the moment eye contact is made, or if this choice is made during the year that follows, or even if it is a conscious choice at all. All that is known for certain is that if you were to look into the beast's glowing eyes, there would be no way for you to tell if you or a relative would suffer the consequences, only when. In the past, the SCP Foundation attempted to eliminate an individual that looked into SCP-023's eyes, along with their whole family before the year was up, trying to take any potential victims away from the Black Shuck before they could be hunted down by the anomalous canine. Much like the way the creature passes through walls by incinerating solid matter, the way SCP-023 dispatches its chosen victims seem to almost be linked to the use of heat. The Foundation has conducted a number of autopsies on those killed by SCP-023, and their findings have always yielded the same result. Anyone killed by the Black Shuck will not exhibit any signs of external damage, no burn marks on their skin or any kind of contusions. However, on closer inspection, these bodies appear to have been filled in, their insides replaced with highly compacted ash. All their organs and internal bodily systems appear to be incinerated by the Black Shuck, but somehow this occurs so rapidly that there is no notable damage caused to the outside of their bodies. To prevent SCP-023 claiming any further victims, the Foundation has another measure in place. The Black Shuck has been fitted with 2 spheres made of hard rubber. These are inserted into the creature's sunken-in eye sockets, blocking anyone from accidentally making eye contact with it. However, over time, thanks to the heating effect of the Shuck's state, these inserts will begin to degrade. When security cameras detect that the glow of SCP-023's eyes have returned to a dangerous level, Foundation personnel will have to replace the rubber spheres to once again block the creature's vision. However, this can only be done after sunset, and any personnel tasked with replacing the inserts are cautioned not to look the dog in the eyes during the process, unless they want to become the Black Shuck's next victim. The SCP Foundation first came into contact with SCP-023 when they received information about an attack that had taken place at a church. While the location of this incident is unknown, if the legends are to be believed, the church may have been located in the moors of a rural region of the British Isles. While the church was in the middle of a service, the Black Shuck entered and killed a number of civilians in attendance. Presumably, the members of this congregation had all at some point seen the large black dog out in the moors, or one of their relatives had. The Foundation stepped in and managed to capture the Black Shuck, giving amnestics to the survivors that had witnessed the attack. The damage done by SCP-023 and the deaths it caused were covered up as attempted arson. However, the Foundation's trouble with SCP-023 was far from over. After the Black Shuck's capture at the church, the dog was able to breach containment on multiple occasions. At first, it had been placed in a standard containment chamber, but it was quickly able to incinerate through the concrete walls of the cell. Foundation personnel later discovered that the dog had settled in an intersection between two corridors and realized that it had resembled a crossroad. These exact corridors became the basis for SCP-023's new containment chamber, and the assistant researcher originally assigned to the dog was reprimanded for negligence. During this and other escape attempts, SCP-023 caused the deaths of a high number of Foundation personnel. As a direct result, researchers assigned to it requested that the Black Shuck be reclassified as a Keter-class anomaly. They also noted that SCP-023 shared certain traits with SCP-1111-1, one of the two entities that form SCP-1111. SCP-1111-1, also referred to as the White Dog, possesses an almost ghostly translucent canine form and abilities that focus on geographic space. In the White Dog's case, it will attack anyone it detects approaching SCP-1111-2, the body of an unidentified man hanging from a noose. Researchers working for the Foundation believe that SCP-023 and SCP-1111-1 might be instances of the same phenomenon, but have been unable to capture the White Dog in order to verify this. Given the number of deaths the Black Shuck had caused, research personnel attempted to reduce the danger that they faced when interacting with the dog. They helped to remove the beast's eyes and teeth, thus making it safer. However, it was during an attempt to do so that SCP-023 once again managed to breach containment. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan, but when researchers removed SCP-023's eyes, the Black Shuck vanished completely from its containment area. SCP security staff scoured the area for it, eventually tracking the dog down to a long stretch of interstate. It is still unknown exactly how many civilians may have seen the Black Shuck as they drove past it, but so far 9 deaths are thought to have stemmed from this incident. The ghostly dog was recaptured, and D-Class personnel removed its fangs. After analyzing the times of incidents, researchers realized that SCP-023 had only been able to escape while the sun was up, leading to new containment procedures mandating that no staff member was to interact with the Shuck until after sunset. The interstate fiasco led to the doctor assigned to watch over SCP-023 being suspended and facing a disciplinary review from his Foundation superiors. The blame for the breach in security that caused the incident was placed at his feet, and a new doctor was placed in charge of observing the Black Shuck. Unfortunately for this new researcher, the incidents involving SCP-023 did not stop there. The newly appointed doctor attempted to give the dog a pair of glass eyes to replace the ones that had been removed before the previous containment breach. Perhaps they thought it was a gesture of kindness, a compassionate act, or maybe they just thought it would look cool for a dog to have glass eyes. No matter the reason, it seemed they had forgotten for a moment that this huge shadow creature was an ancient evil entity and not a dog at all. When the doctor gave the new glass eyes to SCP-023, they immediately took on the exact same properties as its old ones. They began glowing, molten glass leaking from the dog's sockets, and appeared on all reflective surfaces throughout the site the Shuck was being held at. Everything from mirrors and windows to lenses and glasses, computer monitors, anything and everything glass. The Foundation suffered an enormous number of deaths that day. Even staff sitting in the cafeteria would have seen a version of those orange glowing eyes staring at them from the bottom of their bowls, marking them for a fiery death. The facility was quickly evacuated, but the damage had already been done. Anyone that had seen a reflection of the Black Shuck's eyes would be dead within a year. Devastated, the new doctor in charge of overseeing SCP-023 blamed themselves for dooming their research team, as well as the rest of the Foundation staff in the facility. When the sun came up over the horizon, a number of D-Class personnel were sent into SCP-023's enclosure, only to find that the dog had once again vanished. The only trace it had left behind was a puddle of molten glass burning part of the floor. A year later, any and all personnel that had gazed into the Black Shuck's eyes were dead, and their remains were buried in a mass, unmarked grave near the containment facility. Despite the doctor vowing to recapture and contain SCP-023, it remains unclear if they were ever actually successful. There is a chance that the Black Shuck has been gradually making its way back home to the moors of the British Isles. If so, we advise you not to travel after sundown unless you absolutely have to. And if you find yourself at a crossroad, then pray you don't catch sight of a hulking demonic hound staring out at you with eyes that burn through the dark. If you do, well, we hope you enjoy your year. Across all cultures and people, humans have always had one enduring question. What happens to us after we die? As soon as we figured out what death is and that all humans die, excluding some very special anomalies, we started wondering what comes next. Is there some kind of heaven or hell? Are we judged based on our deeds in this life? Or is it just purgatory for all eternity? Assuming, of course, that there's anything at all. Maybe it's just nothingness. Who knows? Some people who have had near-death experiences, like being hit by a truck or having their heart stop, report going into the afterlife. But almost all of these claims were retracted or debunked. And of course, there's the famous white light on the other side of the tunnel that people say precedes death. The human fascination with death extends beyond that too. Mythologies all have their own interpretations of what happens after the physical body stops functioning. The ancient Greeks believed in Hades, a realm ruled by the god of the same name, where the souls of the dead would go to be separated into those who were good in life and those who were bad. The good would feast for eternity in Elysium, while the bad would suffer horrible and poetic punishments depending on what they did. The ancient Egyptians also believed in an underworld of the dead, though theirs was different from their Greek cousin. They believed in the Duat, which was pretty similar to Egypt itself. It had plains, lakes, rivers, deserts. Dead souls would travel down the Nile River to face judgment and either be rewarded or obliterated. Many Egyptian gods and goddesses were also said to reside in the Duat, and some cultures don't believe in an afterlife at all, at least not how most do. Tibetan Buddhists believe in a cycle of reincarnation. When someone dies, their soul is reborn in the body of a new living thing. One can be reincarnated as another human, a plant, an animal, or even an insect. What you're reincarnated into depends on your deeds in your past life, interacting with other reincarnations, and you can only escape the cycle of death and reincarnation by reaching spiritual enlightenment, nirvana. Needless to say, many cultures have their unique interpretation of what happens to the soul and the spirit after your body dies. But there's no proof or way to confirm anything, so it's all confined to the realm of belief. There's no way to reach into the afterlife and speak to someone to find out what it's like. Or is there? Well, that definitely sounds like an anomaly to me, doesn't it? But the SCP Foundation doesn't just have one anomaly related to what happens after you die. Some of you may have seen our video on SCP-2718, What Happens After Death. It's an anomaly very few people know about. The long and short of it is that SCP-2718 is a cognitohazard. Once you learn about it, it infects you. And when someone infected with it dies, their mind and soul stay intact after they die. But they can't move their body, so they're cursed into staying perfectly conscious and aware of every nerve and sensation in the body, even as they're buried and decompose over decades, without being able to do anything about it. Horrible, isn't it? Totally. And that's why you should watch it immediately after you finish this video. Luckily, the SCP-2718 file is safely quarantined and buried in the database. It can't be excised completely, but making it so that only a handful of people ever have a chance of stumbling upon it is the best the Foundation can do to contain this anomaly. As for those people who do, well, what can you do? For a very, very long time, the O5 Council thought that SCP-2718 was the definitive answer to the question of what happens after death. But another anomaly discovered several years later overturned that answer. SCP-2922, Notes from the Under. SCP-2922 isn't anywhere near as heavily classified as SCP-2718, so we can read it safely without worrying about infecting ourselves, which is pretty good, considering what it can do. But let's get into it. SCP-2922 is a Euclid-class anomaly and consists of 3 parts. SCP-2922-A, which is contained under high security at Area 2922, a small facility built especially to contain it. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, one staff member from Project Korbanek has to be in its containment chamber to answer any calls that might come from it. In case you weren't aware, Korbanek is the name of the castle where legends say the Holy Grail is kept and was discovered by King Arthur. Maybe SCP-2922-A is connected to it. SCP-2922-C also needs to be researched by SCP-2922-B due to its importance to Foundation operations. SCP-2922-B seems to be some kind of person in that case. But what does any of this mean? You see, SCP-2922 is a method of communication between a human brain and a telephone. More specifically, it's a kind of concept, what the Foundation would call a mimetic cognitohazard. Those are big words, but think of them as forbidden knowledge. Once you learn them, they affect how you think, and you're able to act differently because of them. You do this in real life too. When you study something in a textbook, you're suddenly able to use knowledge you didn't have before. The only difference is SCP-2922 allows you to do something anomalous with it. Namely, when a subject is implanted with SCP-2922 in a secretive procedure, they can use their mind to call a phone number. A specific phone number has to be chosen, but it can be any number you want. Imagine being able to dial up your friends or family without using a phone, and imagine your phone ringing, only to learn it's someone talking from their mind. Nifty, but this doesn't seem terribly dangerous, right? The Foundation isn't quite sure how it works. After performing research involving SCP-2922 infected subjects calling phone numbers, they've detected that no radio waves or communication signals are involved, which is part of why it is an anomaly. But how would something like this be created? Well, SCP-2922 was created years before the Foundation ever heard of it, by a small software development company. They were trying to create an app that would allow you to send messages to people, and somehow accidentally created an app that was telepathic. It could send messages from the mind. When they realized what they'd created, they got scared and abandoned and buried the project, destroying all their copies of the app. Well, almost all. The Foundation heard about the project several years later and managed to locate a single remaining copy of the SCP-2922 program from the depths of the company's archives. Even though it's an app, it can be used to call landline phones too, which is exactly what the Foundation did. After a few more months of research and experimentation, they confirmed that the app wasn't using the electric signals of the brain like the company had thought. It was actual, real telepathy. They even managed to create an SCP-2922 connection between a researcher and an office telephone. That's what the sub-anomalies are. SCP-2922-A is a simple landline phone, the kind you'd see in a receptionist desk or in someone's office space. It's the designation number that SCP-2922-B can call into. SCP-2922-B is, of course, the human element of SCP-2922. But the Foundation only had one chance at success at this experiment because of the singular copy of the app. So instead of choosing a random D-class who couldn't be trusted or might ruin the test, they had one researcher volunteer to be host to SCP-2922, Dr. Janet Spiegel, a woman who had been with the Foundation's research division for over a decade. She was approved and implanted with SCP-2922. But what is SCP-2922-C? Well, that's Dr. Spiegel's current location as of November 11, 2014. The Foundation believes she's not on this Earth anymore, or even in this reality, but located in an extra-dimensional location. You see, only 2 months after Dr. Spiegel was implanted with SCP-2922, tragedy struck. While driving to work, her car was rammed by a drunk driver, killing her instantly. But only 2 hours later, the SCP-2922-A phone began to ring. The researcher picked up the phone, first answering that the caller had the wrong number, but was interrupted by Dr. Spiegel, thanking God someone had picked up. The doctor thought it was a prank call, but Dr. Spiegel quickly rattled off her name, email, password, and social security number. After her credentials were verified, the researchers were incredulous. They had just heard that her car had been in an accident and that she had died. Dr. Spiegel confirmed that the only thing she could remember was driving through snow and rain and seeing a bright light coming toward her. And then she woke up in the middle of a wide, flat desert. Then it hit her that she really was truly dead and wouldn't be coming back. Before promising to call back in a few minutes, she explained she needed time to process the reality of her situation to the sympathetic coworkers. Meanwhile, the Overseer Council approved Project Korbanek, a Foundation operation to use Dr. Spiegel as SCP-2922-B, to explore and catalog what SCP-2922-C was. If she really was dead, then that would mean the strange desert she was in was the afterlife. The research team was informed of their new assignment, and the next day they began to call in to Dr. Spiegel. At first they just wanted to figure out the landscape of this strange dimension. During the first call, they interviewed Dr. Spiegel on her surroundings. She was still in the large white desert, and the sky was a dark sea green with black clouds and no stars. But the most obvious features were 3 large white moons floating in the sky in place of the sun. It was cold, about 10 degrees Celsius, cold enough to make her shiver, but no wind anywhere. She couldn't see any other signs of life. No animals, no people, no wind, no sound at all. It was completely silent except for her breathing. She still had her body, though when asked about how she felt, she couldn't feel pain, hunger, or even a need to do anything. But before they could continue, she asked if she could speak to her husband. The researchers told her they'd need to talk to the O5 Council about it, and that they'd tried to convince them. Dr. Spiegel missed her husband, and they were sure he felt the same about his wife. Then she offered a plan. She'd walk infinitely in one direction until she saw something other than desert, then she'd call them again. The researchers agreed, and Dr. Spiegel hung up the phone. 5 whole days after that call, the phone rang again. The researchers picked it up, only to hear SCP-2922 out of breath and panting. When asked what happened, she started to explain. She had been traveling through the desert for 5 days, though this place had no day-night cycle and she hadn't felt tired or hungry. Then she encountered a mountain range and began to approach its base when she saw a life form. But it wasn't human. It walked on 2 feet and looked like a mammal, but that was it. It was some kind of gigantic primate, like a massive gorilla. It easily dwarfed the mountains she saw and had to be at least 2 kilometers tall. She had felt it before she had seen it. Huge, slow footsteps shaking the ground, then saw it exit the mountain range. She saw it had matted black fur and 2 huge glowing white eyes with no mouth. But then, it stepped on her, not aggressively, just out of curiosity. It seemed to be investigating her and seeing how much force she could withstand. She was crushed flat, of course, but only a few seconds later her body put itself back together and she was back to normal. Then it lost interest and went off into the desert she had just come from. The researchers were incredulous at this, seeming confirmation that SCP-2922-C was the afterlife. But they were interrupted by Dr. Spiegel, saying that she could see people making campfires in the valley ahead. Hundreds of them, huddled up and some buried halfway into the ground. The researchers guessed they were trying to escape their situation, and Dr. Spiegel worried aloud that she'd wind up like them. Then she made another request, citing the service she had been competently performing with full loyalty, that she be allowed to speak to her husband. But the O5s had already decided that she would only be authorized to speak with other Project Korbanek personnel. She asked the Foundation to hire him, but with an art history degree, he wouldn't be of use to the Foundation beyond this one anomaly. Angrily, she swore and hung up the phone. The next time they heard from her, the call was brief and icy. Dr. Spiegel was clearly still angry over being denied the right to speak to her husband, but claimed she had good news. A wagon being driven by a skeletal horse and a tall man in a white robe had come to the human camp. He informed them that they were being taken to a place called the Elysian Fields. Remember Elysium, the Greek afterlife from earlier? Dr. Spiegel did, and believed that the man was taking them to a sort of paradise. The researchers remarked that she didn't seem very happy, but she quickly hung up the phone. After that strange exchange, SCP-2922 didn't ring for a very long time. No further transmissions came in for 7 months. All attempts to phone Dr. Spiegel instead rang and rang, but were never picked up. Project Korbanek was put on hold. until one day a voicemail came to SCP-2922-A. The voicemail was recorded by Dr. Spiegel, but was different in tone from the other calls. It seemed angry. She explained that she had been keeping an eye on the Foundation's efforts to track her down, using the fact that she had gained the favor of some kind of powerful godlike entity. She told the Foundation about the possibility of an Elysium afterlife, a paradise, and then knew that they'd want more. She had lied about the Grim Reaper, but everything else had been entirely true. But what happened after she visited the human camp was, in her words, far too complicated to explain. But she would be more than happy to answer the Foundation's questions of what happens after you die for a small price. If the O5 Council let her speak to her husband, she'd tell them everything. But if they weren't willing to accept one civilian, then she'd know, and would never tell them the real answer. She signed off, ending the voicemail. The researchers were shocked at this sudden betrayal, and forwarded the request up the ladder. But by the time the O5 Council began deliberating on whether to involve her husband in SCP-2922, something else happened. Foundation researchers tracked another voicemail coming from the same kind of anomaly, except it was going to Herman Spiegel's house, Dr. Spiegel's widowed husband. Figuring that she was trying to contact her husband, Mobile Task Force Psi-8, the silencers, raided his home. But as soon as they threw open the door and moved in, Mr. Spiegel threw the phone towards the wall to destroy it, and was shot by the soldiers. The phone, however, was unharmed, and still had one voicemail on it that the Foundation was able to extract. The voicemail was from SCP-2922-B, Janet Spiegel talking to her husband. At first, she was assuring him that he wasn't insane, and that he really was hearing his wife from beyond the grave. Then told him to listen carefully while she explained. The same godlike entity she had befriended had worked some magic to allow her to contact a phone besides SCP-2922-A one time. She told him that a Foundation task force was headed to his house and would be there within 10 minutes. Not just any task force, Psi-8, a squad dedicated to Black Ops executions. There wasn't time to run. He would die. But she reassured him that all wasn't lost, even though the situation must be terrifying. She knew he was an atheist, but she was proof that there was an afterlife. And not just one, millions of afterlives. And the one she was in was preferable to most of the others. Most importantly, her husband could join her. He already knew how to get to the afterlife even if he didn't remember. He'd figure it out on the way. Her husband listened to her instructions with rapt attention. She advised him on the path he should take once he got to the desert. He should follow the moon on the left until he reached the valley where the Striders, the massive primates, dwelled. There he should ask one of the trees where she had gone and follow that path. She also advised him not to do anything to anger anyone. Let the Striders kill him. It's their way of saying hello. He'd regenerate with no harm done. But there were fates worse than death that he should avoid at all costs, getting sent back, for one. But before she could finish her advice, both of them realized that the MTF were at his door. Hurriedly telling him to delete the voicemail so the Foundation wouldn't find out, she assured him that she had help from her godlike friend and that she fully believed in him, and that he should never give up. She told him she loved him forever. By shooting Mr. Spiegel, the MTF had inadvertently sent him to SCP-2922-C along with his wife, but the Foundation wasn't done yet. SCP-2922 had let them set up Operation Galahad, a project to send trained Foundation operatives into the afterlife to try and apprehend Janet Spiegel before she could bring down the Foundation. Operation Galahad has plenty more stories where that came from, but we'll cover those a different day. The diver screams a silent scream as the giant squid's beak digs into his skin, its many grasping tentacles grabbing him and holding him in place. Nearby, his fellow divers are driven half-mad with terror as they see mysterious figures floating towards them through the murk, and strange Russian voices speaking in their heads. Nobody can help them. They're down too deep, too consumed by the darkness and the pressure of the sea. They're now at the mercy of whatever is inside the submarine. Beginning in the 1940s, with the dawn of nuclear weapons, the American government conducting the world's first atomic weapons test, and the Soviet Union responding in kind with nuclear testing of their own, the two powers entered an arms race fueled by rivalry and a thirst to prove their strength on the world stage. What followed were decades of staggering technological advancements as each nation tried to outdo and intimidate the other. The Soviet Union crossed into the cold reaches of outer space, deploying the satellite Sputnik. The United States responded with the founding of NASA. Tensions reached a fever pitch during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, as United States citizens feared they were teetering on the brink of nuclear war. In July of 1968, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States came together to sign the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, agreeing to abandon their pursuit of increasing nuclear power and turn their focus to disarmament. But several months before the treaty was signed, the Soviet government was dealing in weaponry far more dangerous than nuclear missiles, something the other world powers knew nothing about. These deadly secrets were hidden aboard a submarine known as SCP-741. SCP-741 is the underwater wreckage of a Soviet submarine that sank in March of 1968 and came into the custody of the SCP Foundation in 1999. The submarine, a version of the Charlie II class, was deployed under unusual circumstances, which attracted the attention of the United States government. In an attempt to learn more about the submarine, the U.S. government launched Project Redacted, which attempted to recover the vessel from the ocean in the early 1970s. They managed to recover a few pieces of the vessel, though the specifics are highly classified. In the late 1990s, the U.S. government contacted the SCP Foundation, informing them of a possible Euclid or Keter-class anomaly in the wreck. At this point, it passed into the custody and surveillance of the Foundation. The submarine is on the ocean floor, broken into 3 pieces. The hull was broken into bits during Project Redacted recovery attempt, but was largely intact when it first sank, except for 2 holes, one just in front of the sail and one just below the starboard missile tubes. Apparently, the vessel sank rapidly due to flooding after an enemy missile strike, which occurred while it was surfacing. Though all parts of the submarine are accounted for, no members of the crew have been located. Additionally, none of the emergency escape equipment on board has been used, raising further questions about what became of the crew. Wherever they went, they seem to have left something behind. Whenever divers are sent down to investigate the wreckage, they report experiencing anomalous currents and strange sea life, and hearing moans, disembodied voices, and incoherent whispering. They also report seeing blurry, faintly glowing figures. Additionally, the ocean life in the area is unnaturally aggressive, particularly large squid and sharks. This effect was first noted during a manned expedition into the waters around the wreckage, described in Incident Report 1741-A. Divers A-26 through A-30 embarked from the icebreaker Yamal into the waters below with the intention of studying the potential anomalous activity surrounding the wreckage. As the group of divers approached the submarine, they could feel the shift in the water around them, the oppressive feeling of abnormally increasing pressure bearing down and threatening to crush them. If their specialized diving equipment were to fail, they knew that that would be it, and the command would have to come and fish their corpses out of the water. Or even worse, they would vanish entirely, meeting the same mysterious fate as the crew of that doomed submarine. But they couldn't fixate on that. They had a job to do. At first glance, the wreckage appeared undisturbed, unchanged since the previous inspection. Still, they needed to take a closer look to be sure. As the team got closer to the vessel, A-30 was startled by the sight of movement from within the wreckage, spotting motion through one of the holes in the structure as something passed by. He pointed it out to his colleagues, but they dismissed it as likely a giant isopod or spider crab, which were crawling all over the surrounding area. A-30 laughed off his jumpiness, agreed that they were probably right, and continued the exploration as planned. Control authorized the divers to proceed to the next step, and A-29 activated sonar and lights, moving toward the starboard side breach. There, a faint glowing caught his eye. The glow resembled that of radioactive material, but when the team checked the radiation levels in the area, they remained stable. Whatever the source of the glow was, it wasn't radioactive. At this point, his neutron counter began to register something, and all of a sudden, a disembodied voice could be heard saying, "Vasily Yevgeny, can you hear me?" The voice was muffled, and though it could be heard over their communication channels, it emanated from somewhere in the wreckage, deep, deep underwater. As A-29 watched, a glowing shape emerge from the darkness. It was only an outline, the suggestion of a silhouette, but the shape was undeniably familiar. It looked like a person. The other divers quickly noted the apparition too and began to panic. Some checked their nitrogen levels, believing it to be some sort of nitrogen narcosis, while others pointed out that they couldn't all be suffering from nitrogen narcosis at the same time. The unknown voice continued speaking, saying, "Help me, it is getting hard to breathe." The divers debated what to do next, questioning whether what they were seeing was even real, when all at once, the humanoid figure vanished from sight. The divers attempted to shake off the startling encounter, and they resumed their duties, the investigation proceeding as normal. After a few moments of uneventful work, another interruption presented itself in the form of a 5-meter-long squid swimming around the wreckage. Its presence startled the divers at first, particularly those closest to the animal, but the others encouraged them to ignore it, citing the fact that there are no records of these squid attacking humans. So they did, continuing their work as the squids circled them with apparent curiosity. A-27 spotted an unusual shell below the wreckage, notably large and difficult to identify, and Control requested that they bring it up to the surface for further inspection by a marine biologist. The diver began attaching haul cables to the shell as the squid crept closer and closer. All of a sudden, A-26 screamed, and there was a sudden bloom of blood in the water. The squid, despite it being uncharacteristic behavior for its species, attacked the diver, biting him savagely. Prompted by cries for help from the diving team, Control began to reel A-26 back towards the surface, proceeding slowly to give him decompression time, and the squid took advantage of the slow retreat. It chased after the diver, grabbing hold of him and biting down again, tearing away at him as it gripped him in its tentacles. Still, Control continued reeling him in, hoping to free him from the squid's grasp as they yanked him to the surface. The other divers were ordered to get themselves out of there as fast as possible, an order they gladly obeyed. As they swam back to the surface, A-30 saw something else moving in the depths. He couldn't make out what it was, but the sight of it gave him a sick feeling of dread deep in the pit of his stomach. The 4 divers were recovered alive, along with the shell. Examination of the shell indicated that it resembled that of the extinct orthoconic nautiloids, but it was not fossilized. It was taken for further study, given the possible implication of extinct species anomalously manifesting in the vicinity of SCP-714. Diver A-26 lost a limb and was exposed to an unknown venom via bites from the attacking squid. His camera was destroyed in the process. As squid are not known to attack humans unprovoked, this behavior has been attributed to the influence of SCP-741, though the exact link between the two is yet to be determined. An anomalous pressure gradient surrounds the wreck with a radius of approximately 250 meters, starting around the center of the submarine. The pressure in this area is much greater than it should be, given the depth of the waters there. This unusually high pressure makes sonar analysis extremely difficult, as well as threatening the safety of any divers in the vicinity of the wreck. The few records that the Foundation has managed to obtain from the Russian and US governments indicate that the submarine was being used to transport some sort of secret cargo. Though the specifics of this cargo are still unknown, there is reason to believe that it differed from any type of nuclear or chemical weaponry. On a date redacted from official files, the SCPS Basisti was patrolling the area around SCP-741 when its sonar detected some unknown entity approaching SCP-741 from the south at a pace of 46 knots. The crew compared the acoustic signature of the contact with known submarines and torpedoes, but could not find a match. The Basisti attempted to reach the contact via sonobuoy drops and active sonar pings, but it did not respond. When the contact crossed into the total underwater exclusion zone, it became classified as hostile. At that point, the sonar recorded sounds of an undersea missile launch, and Basisti responded with the utmost urgency. The ship broke away from its original area and fired a Type 53 torpedo at the underwater threat. 15 seconds after the Basisti launched its torpedo, missiles of an unidentified configuration were seen breaking the water, flying at a height of 1.8 meters and a velocity of 0.92 Mach. The missiles did not emit any detectable radar, nor did they respond to any launch chaff or flares from the Basisti. Both of the missiles were engaged by Basisti's 3KN-5 Kinsul surface-to-air missiles and Kashtan point defense systems, and were destroyed at 1,800 meters and 210 meters from impact, respectively. After the missiles were neutralized, the hostile vessel could be heard engaging in evasive maneuvers. At this point, there were 4 closely spaced explosions and the sound of a submarine disintegrating. The identity of the attacker, as well as its intention toward SCP-741, have not yet been determined. The incident resulted in the Foundation research team suggesting an expansion of the acoustic sensor net, as well as additional patrol and defense assets placed in the area. Additionally, they advised an acquisition of undersea retaliatory capability. The incident was classified Incident 1741-C. The sonar recordings from the SCPs Basisti during Incident 1741-C were taken for further analysis by the research team. The in-depth review revealed anomalous acoustic signatures that did not match up with any known forms of propulsion, including magneto-hydrodynamic drive. Currently, the nature of the unidentified attacker remains a mystery, and it has not been attributed to any particular government or organization. Following the incident involving the SCPs Basisti, an American intelligence agent reached out to the Foundation, offering further insight into the secretive government programs looking into SCP-741. He agreed to sit for an interview with a Foundation researcher assigned to the project, on the condition that his identity remain protected. The SCP researcher's name is absent from the official file as well. The 2 men sat in a Foundation interview room, and the interviewer asked his informant why he chose to come forward, given the US government had simply chosen to sit on this information for 30 years. You've seen those reports. Project Redacted. Now, we know that part too. How the directors didn't make the connection is beyond me. That and the stuff the Redacted pulled up? Yeah, the other part you don't hear about is what some of the research team died of. And the crewmen we buried? Just uniforms. Also, the nuclear device we recovered wasn't a missile or torpedo warhead. It was a demolition charge. Does that make any sense? After all those clues, I had to come forward. Why the directorate didn't is something I can't fully explain. This particular statement puzzled the Foundation researcher, raising questions he hadn't anticipated. Only uniforms? Did this mean that the sub had been unmanned? The informant replied, No, not unmanned. There were no bodies, but personal effects were everywhere, along with uniforms. There was some blood, human. Before you ask, on one of the torpedoes and a bit of skin where somebody probably crushed his hand loading the thing. Just no bodies left. When I first looked into all this, I had no clue what the hell had gone on down there, but I started putting things together. The Foundation agent began to speculate based on the mounting evidence. Could it have been a Soviet weapons program? A deadly biological agent of some kind? No, it wasn't that. I thought maybe it could have been, so I dialed up some of my contacts at Biopreparant. Us spies wind up owing each other favors after a while, and they denied it vehemently. Not your usual cover-up baloney either. They clearly stated that whatever the sub was carrying, it wasn't theirs. They wanted no part of it. Sounded like he was gonna puke when I mentioned redacted. Doctor, do you have any idea what it takes to make a bioweapons researcher sick? Now that wasn't what really bugged me though. What really kept me awake at night was the KGB file that fell into our hands. They mentioned a covert op by the Soviet military against an internal unnamed faction to get rid of a, quote, terrifying weapons that even the Soviet Union can't safely control. They wanted to lose it, whatever it was, or maybe fob it off onto the US. Of course, that all came to light right before the Iron Curtain fell. And given the atmosphere at the time, it was practically impossible to convince the directors that they weren't talking about nukes. And even once I did, they still didn't even think this was worthy of action. I mean, the redacted would probably have me hanged for treason if they ever find me, but it was worth the risk. And by what I can gather, sounds like Russia thinks so too, loaning you half the Pacific Fleet and all. The interview continued after this point, but the rest of the conversation was considered irrelevant and stricken from the official file. The interview left the Foundation with more questions than answers, though they were more certain than ever that SCP-741 must be kept under strict containment procedures. Due to the object's location at the bottom of the sea, as well as the unusually elevated pressure around it, it is unlikely that many civilians will come into contact with it. However, as an extra protective measure, sonar and submersible monitoring is conducted on a periodic basis in order to verify that the wreckage has not been interfered with in any way. The Foundation contracted Russian warships, SCPs Basisti and Krasnoyarsk, has been selected for this purpose. If any unauthorized activity occurs in the area surrounding SCP-741, nuclear and conventional missiles may be deployed. Any movement of SCP-741 is grounds for an immediate nuclear strike. Whatever secrets SCP-741 holds, whatever it was transporting that was even more of an uncontrollable threat than nuclear warfare, they're better left alone down there, at the bottom of the sea. Your boss's office, his name etched on the frosted glass window in the door, sitting at the end of a long hallway. He called you in, and you don't know if you'll be leaving with your job. A grimy public bathroom filled with graffiti, spiders, cracked toilet seats, and a sinister shadow in the very last stall. A surgical theater where masked doctors wait with gleaming scalpels, forceps, and bone saws, preparing for an operation that you don't know if you'll wake up from. All of these have one thing in common. They're rooms that inspire dread. But after this video, you'll look back on all of them like you would your cozy childhood bedroom. A wise man once said, life has many doors. What he didn't say is that sometimes opening the wrong door can be a way of bringing that life to an untimely end, or worse. Especially when you're dealing with the kind of horrifying anomalies secured and contained by the SCP Foundation. You may think it's what's lurking inside the room that might be your biggest threat, but that's a potentially lethal assumption. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is the room itself. And that's what we're here to talk about today. 7 of the most terrifying rooms on the Foundation's database, none of which have ever been featured on this channel before. So reach out, grab the handle, and open the door. Welcome to the SCP Foundation's most terrifying rooms. All you can do is hope that, by the end, you'll actually be able to leave. We'll begin with an old classic from Series 1, SCP-002, a maleficent meatball known as the living room. There's a decent chance you're sitting in your living room right now while you watch this video, so you may be thinking, what's so wrong about that? But this really is a living room, and it's always on the lookout for some tasteful new furniture. From the outside, SCP-002 appears to be a huge, tumorous blob made out of living flesh. Sure, that may seem off-putting, but don't be so superficial. The inside of 002 is a different story. It may appear like your standard low-rent apartment from within, but this place has a lot of personality. There's a single window, despite there being no opening for a window from the outside. In addition to all the standard furniture, chairs, tables, a TV stand, it's actually developed a number of other wonderful amenities since being contained by the Foundation, including 2 lamps, a throw rug, a television, a radio, a beanbag chair, 3 books in an unknown language, 4 children's toys, and a small potted plant. The first thing you might notice about the room is the funny smell. Then you might take a closer look at all that lovely furniture. That's when you'll realize that every single piece of furniture in there is made out of human tissue. Wood is polished and varnished bone. Fabrics are woven from human hair. Leather is made from tanned human skin. This is what happens to anyone who enters SCP-002. And sadly, if you've gotten close enough to see this, it's already too late. We hope you enjoy the rest of your existence as a brand new armchair. But maybe you don't want to get turned into furniture inside a living room within a giant tumor. Maybe you've got more specific needs. You like puzzles, exercises, and most of all, solitude. You like to test your mental and physical fortitude without worrying about the distractions caused by having to deal with other human beings. If that sounds like you, then let's get your feet wet and tell you about a wonderful piece of prime real estate you can find under the sea, SCP-057. This underwater chamber is almost impossible to get to without a James Cameron-style mini submarine, but believe us, it's worth the effort. If you manage to access SCP-057 and enter its submerged chamber, then you're going to be treated to the best last challenge of your life. The door will close behind you, permanently, ensuring that wonderful privacy you so covet. Then the walls. These impenetrable monoliths of slate-covered stone will begin to move. Like a kind of high-stakes game show, you'll need to keep moving, avoiding the ever-shifting walls as the environment around you becomes more and more disorienting. There is no escape, only survival, and survival is only temporary. When your body fails you, or your mind snaps under the weight of sustained mortal terror, that's when those walls will close in. The monoliths of SCP-057 will get closer and closer and closer, until your body is crushed between them, killing you with a torturously slow squeeze where nothing and nobody will ever hear your final choked screams. But it's all worth it for that glorious ocean view. Oh, look at all those adorable little fishies. But hey, maybe sea punk isn't your favorite aesthetic. Maybe you're the more industrial type. You couldn't feel more at home than among a complex network of anomalous pipes. We'll admit that's eerily specific, but it isn't half as eerie as SCP-015. If you ever find yourself opening the door to the main room of a certain undisclosed warehouse, you'll feel like you've walked into an early 2000s screensaver with a decidedly gritty edge. An impossibly huge and intricate mass of pipes, vents, boilers, and other various plumbing apparatus that just keeps growing, seemingly becoming more strange and anomalous as it does so. These pipes have been made out of bone, wood, steel, pressed ash, human flesh, glass, and granite. There aren't any pipes made out of traditional pipe-making materials like lead, copper, ceramics, or PVC. And if you think what the pipes are made of is weird, the materials that travel through them are even freakier. These include oil, mercury, rats, a species of insect not yet identified, ground glass, seawater, entrails, and molten iron. And this is important to remember, because if you appear hostile to SCP-015 or enter the room carrying tools, the pipes will begin to burst and spray you with their contents in self-defense, resulting in one of the few times in human history where you'd be incredibly lucky to only be sprayed with rats or human entrails. Much like SCP-173, the sculpture, it's important to keep this room under strict observation. It's when the pipes are left unoccupied that they start expanding and trying to grow downwards in the hopes of mixing with the sewer system below. If ever that happens, then the pipes may end up coming to a room near you. And considering that people have also reported screaming coming from inside the pipes, what comes out of them may not even be as frightening as what could be going in. But maybe you don't want a warehouse. Perhaps you just want to rent a small, cozy room in a one-story building over in Weehawken, New Jersey. Problem is, if you try to do this, you might end up lodging in SCP-5256, a room that defies reality in a number of freaky ways thanks to its prior occupant, a highly unstable reality warper. The reality filters get stronger the further you go into the room, with the terminus being the room's far corner, which presents as an empty void that's impossible to even see. A damaged bloody hammer is lodged into the far wall. Metal fragments covered in human blood float near the entrance, half-eaten bugs all over the floor. There's a crucifix on the wall along with medical-grade anesthetics with trace amounts of neural tissue inside. All evidence points to the reality warper having been the victim of atrocious and inhumane acts, perhaps as a way to cure it of its anomalous affliction. And to add to the creep factor, many believe its body is still in there, lurking in the unseeable corner. How do we know? Because despite the corner of the room being unseeable, people have still performed simple tactile tests by sticking their hand into the space. One D-Class reported it feeling like leathery flesh with occasional scraps of fabric, and sharp needle-like objects occasionally sticking out of its skin. But for rent this cheap, who can really complain about a body or two? But that's enough about things that are just creepy. Let's get to dangerous instead. A room that won't just freak you out with some eerie anomalous sights. If you get unlucky, it'll give you a horrifying death. After all, who doesn't like a little excitement? Step into SCP-4595, a small room in a woodshed behind an abandoned house near Jasper, Indiana. You'll be taken in by its rustic charm at first. It's a quiet, peaceful setting where you're alone with your thoughts. When the room was first found, it contained a small, blood-stained shovel and a skeleton of an adolescent male. But don't let that put you off. Don't let the charcoal marking of the word witch written on the exterior door bother you either. It all just adds to the character of the room. Oh, there is one thing we should probably mention. There is an entity known as SCP-4595-A that lives a meter beneath the room. She's a witch-like creature, rotted and covered in wounds on her torso and face. Her mere presence will instill a sense of paranoia and dread into you, getting worse and worse the longer you're in there, but stay quiet about it. If at any point you disturb SCP-4595, all the empty spaces in your chest cavity as well as your lungs, airways, stomach, and intestine will suddenly fill with live desert locusts, causing you to experience a horrible death. So be a considerate upstairs neighbor, or else. So, remember when we said earlier that it's not always what's inside the room that can cause you harm? Sometimes it's the thing right on the other side of the door. Look at the nearest closed door. Really focus on it. Tell us, how can you be so sure there's not something on the other side? Can you hear its heavy, wheezing breaths? It's not a home invader. It's something even worse. SCP-303. And it can make any room, anywhere, an absolute nightmare for you. Keep an eye on that door while we explain. SCP-303 is a tall, emaciated creature with dark skin and no face. Just a giant mouth twisted into a fixed grimace of pain with unnaturally long teeth. Nobody has ever seen its full body, but everyone afflicted with its anomalous effects somehow has an innate knowledge of exactly what they're dealing with. The amount of time that 303 spends behind the door seems to be random, but whenever it appears, people will be afflicted with such a level of raw, paralytic terror that they physically cannot bear to open the door while it's still there. This is one thing if it's hiding inside a broom closet, but if you're trapped in a room with only one exit, and 303 manifests behind it, you are in real trouble. As the number of people who have died of dehydration and starvation in totally normal rooms while boxed in by 303 have found out, when you're dealing with this monster, any room can be a nightmare. But while 303 is no doubt scary, it's not quite as mind-melting as SCP-970, the final anomalous room on this list. Much like 303, it involves doors, and rather than being fixed to a single location, it can appear in theoretically any room. Known as the recursive room, stepping through this door will lead to a copy of the room you were just inside. A little trippy, but not exactly pure nightmare fuel. But much like how a photocopier will slowly create distortions if the same image is copied repeatedly, the more rooms in the recursive room sequence that one cycles through, the more distorted each one gets. Eventually, the rooms will begin to display visuals straight out of your worst nightmares. Foundation researchers who sent a drone through a 6-hour sequence of recursive rooms ended up being discharged to undergo psychiatric treatment after seeing their own mutilated corpses in the rooms. A cruel trick? Or a deadly phenomenon of things to come in a darker possible future? Either way, these unfortunate researchers couldn't get their experience in the recursive room out of their heads. But we're sure you'll have a more pleasant time. There you have it, folks. Some of the most terrifying rooms that the SCP Foundation is aware of. Let us know which one was your favorite down in the comments. And of course, be careful. If these are the ones the Foundation has in containment, imagine the ones that are still out there, waiting to be discovered. For all you know, it could only be one door away. We've covered a lot here on this channel, and what you might have noticed about the nature of our discoveries is that knowledge is best broken down before digested. Which is to say, if you are to learn how to assemble a computer, it may benefit you also to see one taken apart. When you do so, you'll notice in front of you not a computer at all, but a collection of individual parts. It's in understanding these distinctive parts in isolation that helps us shape our awareness of their marriage and how they cooperate with one another to become their collective self. Sure, this may be good in practice, but then tell me, how do we comprehend a whole that is composed of parts unwilling to isolate themselves from the rest? Because, let's face it, not all things, let alone SCPs, can be torn apart for the convenience of our study. No matter the subject we seek to understand, it may choose to resist our deconstruction by one way or another. Landmarks like the Temples of Malta and the Pyramid of Djoser are held together by our respect. Monuments like the Statue of Liberty are held together by copper. The family was held together by Charles Manson, but it's not always the preservation of history or elements of the periodic table or psychopaths that reject humans' wishes to disassemble. Far stronger than forces of nuts and bolts are that of character and loyalty, and SCP-2085 is welded together by exactly that. SCP-2085 is a militant anarchist organization consisting of 6 cybernetically enhanced individuals, A1 through A5 and B, operating under the name Kuroi Usagi Shiden, or more commonly known as the Black Rabbit Company. SCP-2085-A subjects are 5 adult female augmented humans, designated SCP-2085-A-1 through SCP-2085-A-5. Subjects are genetic chimeras, each with an estimated 6 to 10 different gene donors. They are fluent in Japanese, Mandarin, Chinese, Cantonese, Korean, Russian, and English, with additional languages varying by individual. Subjects display an array of genetic and cybernetic enhancements, including genetic splices of Felis catus physiology, that is, having cat-like ears, tails, and hair. These tails are prehensile and capable of holding small objects, so if you're accusing one of them of stealing your pen, don't just go searching their pockets. They also have grip pads on hands and feet, in case they ever did decide to retire from anarchy and take up surfing. Their impressive features don't stop there. If they haven't already put James Bond's gadgets to shame yet, just wait. Daniel Craig is about to look like Dora the Explorer. SCP-2085-A-1 through A-5 all have ocular implants with thermal vision, heads-up display, and recording functionality. Also noted are carbon nanoweave muscle fiber augmentation, reinforced endoskeleton, and brain-computer interface with internal hard drive. The list goes on, each etc. more elaborate than the next. Yet what stands out most about them is not a weapon, but an attitude. These 6 members, although now held in isolation from one another, do not show any signs of splitting up, not even when under the heavy pressure of the Foundation's interrogation. Agents spend their hours looking for cracks to dig their fingers into, trying to get one to betray the other and reveal sensitive information. But when asked to spill the beans, SCP-2085 screws the lid on tighter. They remain, as a whole, resistant to our deconstruction. The agents get nowhere with their investigation, and with each minute wasted, it's another victory for SCP-2085. The hours go on and they keep stacking up W's, building momentum day after day, growing stronger and stronger as a unit. As the Foundation tries to tear the group apart, they respond with even greater resistance. And this style of resistance is unique to each member. Imagine you are confronting SCP-2085-A-2. She is talkative, and so you think you might get somewhere. You are all ears. But what SCP-2085-A-2 sees isn't ears, but troughs, and she is happy to feed you her slop. She talks and talks, and you listen closer and closer, but all you are getting is misinformation, false names, inaccurate stories, dates that don't add up. You focus and follow along, only to find yourself having run a marathon all the way to a dead end. Now you are faced with SCP-2085-A-5, who takes a different, more nonsensical approach. You are happy to no longer have to sit through inaccuracies to decipher truths, but now there are no truths at all. All that you are given are absurdities. She speaks in a way that makes you scratch your head, once saying for no apparent reason, "I take a hammer and I break my legs. I break 'em for the better." After so many scratches, you swear you've dug an inch into your skin. And so you move on to SCP-2085-A-4, hoping for better luck. She is straightforward with you, that much you like, but she's hostile and doesn't cooperate. When you ask her name, she raises her middle finger. She tucks it back in to create a fist, and then that fist punches the divider between you. No amount of reinforced glass could make you feel safe at that moment. Cracks spread. It looks like a web spun by a spider, and you feel as small as one. Thankfully, a protective shutter is lowered. Aerosol sedatives are pumped into the containment unit. She continues to try to escape, yelling profanities even harsh for someone locked behind bars. Your ears have taken a beating from curse words, nonsensical rambles, and heaps of misinformation. You want to lower your head into a toilet bowl and hear nothing but water. Yes, that is where these women have driven you. Your head to the bottom of a toilet bowl. You have put in so many hours, and yet you have learned nothing new. And if you can't learn anything new, you might have to rely more on what you already know. But what do you know? Well, you know this. Their track record is quite impressive. Verified operations include smuggling, theft, assault, vandalism, kidnapping, extortion, property damage, possession of fissile materials, corporate sabotage, embezzlement, identity theft, fraud, copyright infringement, piracy, possession, transport, and sale of anomalous items, and, of course, tax evasion. Yet, when grilled under the heat of investigation, they do not reveal any details about the nature of these operations. You just know that they happened. All that is told is that SCP-2085 navigates in such a way as to minimize the chance of civilian casualties and maximize material and morale damage to their target. They are proud of this. It seems as if SCP-2085 perceives themselves on the side of good. While their list of operations on paper look like crimes, they stand proudly behind them, pleading guilty with a grin. But behind every smile is more teeth. Teeth that go beyond saying cheese. Teeth hiding in the dark caves of a sealed mouth. And you are determined to play dentist and find your way in. But SCP-2085 doesn't say "ah" for just anyone. So how are you to understand a group that resists our preferred methods of learning? How are you to properly assess the pieces of a puzzle when the puzzle is glued tightly together? It starts at the top. Before you can decipher the motives of a nation, you'd be smart to study their leader. And if you want to extrapolate the schemes of a football team, you'd interview the coach. And to truly know the moral of a television show, you'd be better off asking the creator than the actors. All of this is just to say, if you are to ever understand the complexities of SCP-2085, it is necessary you begin with SCP-2085-B, the person pulling the string of the entire operation for all of these years. Now you might be imagining a man of many muscles, someone able to fight a bear with an arm tied behind his back, someone who kicks through saloon doors, tilts back his liquor, and walks out with a woman in each arm, or a catgirl. But you'd be dead wrong. SCP-2085-B, also known as Wizard, does not look like an imposing lead at first glance, or even at the 100th glance. He is generally in very poor health, and his face shows it. He suffers from a variety of illnesses, most notably a vitamin D deficiency, acute radiation syndrome, and has unmanageable scarring from severe and repeated skin ulceration. He doesn't wear a cape and glamorous spandex often found hanging in superheroes' closets, but instead he wears an advanced crew escape suit, accompanied by a cheap bathrobe and flimsy red felt wizard's hat. He looks, with no elegant way of putting it, like a dork, a goofball, a doofus. You get the point. Furthermore, he is an adult male human with certain cybernetic and genetic enhancements. He has an adaptation of the gastrointestinal tract to allow for an all-liquid diet. Within his suit, an esophageal input port and waste output port are integrated. It is equipped with modifications to regulate sweat, reduce abrasion damage from extended usage, and aid in skin regeneration. His genetic enhancements include the replacement of 11 previously missing digits on hands and feet, and also has an internal drug pump, typically used for painkillers. Because, as we are about to learn, SCP-2085-B is most often on the wrong end of pain. Notice these modifications are not those you would find in a science fiction novel, but more likely behind the trench coat of a suspicious man in a dark alley. And we all know nothing good is ever concealed behind a trench coat. But have you ever wondered if that truth also extends to robes? Because when we pull open SCP-2085's, what we find is truly terrifying. SCP-2085-1. SCP-2085-1 is a fibrous mass of self-replicating carbon nanomaterials within SCP-2085-B's chest cavity, with growths protruding into the liver, pancreas, gallbladder, spinal cord, and left lung. The The growth of the SCP-2085-1 and its consumption of SCP-2085-B's body tissues has been impeded through the addition of various containment implants used to sever communication between growth sections and control nodes and counter the replication process. SCP-2085-1's rate of replication without the influence of these containment implants is unknown. SCP-2085-1's periods of activity occur on average once every 3 months. The process lasts for up to 15 minutes and causes SCP-2085-B intense pain. Imagine a heart attack. Imagine Mike Tyson using your sternum like a punching bag. Imagine a cactus strapped to your front. This is the pain and torture SCP-2085 wears daily. There is no S logo printed on his chest like Superman. No symmetrically slick symbol like Batman. Instead, just cancerous growth. Kryptonite worn like a tie. The knot never to be loosened. But to SCP-2085-B, this anomaly is not just a number to be studied, but more so a being to be understood. It is more personal than a medical condition. It is something that he wakes up with each and every day. He calls it Red. At first, the Foundation saw SCP-2085's close connection with Red to be childish and silly, as if a small boy who names his freckles out of boredom and loneliness. But as you are about to see, how they met was more memorable than first finding a freckle in the mirror. A meteor struck down, and SCP-2085-B was the only person at the scene. Red was inside. As Wizard approached the meteor, Red leapt onto him and buried a home into his chest cavity. Far from a freckle on the skin, Red is a cancer. It grows and grows, leaching to what it can. It can't be removed with surgery. It can't be covered by a band-aid. It has no empathy or mercy. It leeches on and eats away at its host. But it's more than pain that it causes. Falling off a swing set and bursting open your leg hurts, sure, but at least both you and your injury are on the same team. Cuts try to heal. When left alone, injuries make effort to find homeostasis. But Red is a different breed. It hates us in a way that injuries are incapable of doing. It has a deep disdain for humanity. It tears Wizard down, reveling in his degradation. Its sole purpose is to eat him whole. Wizard can only take this personally, as he doesn't just feel the universally understood sensation of pain, but also the unique passion of its purpose. SCP-2085-B's adventures with Red seem to be where our story begins, and what ultimately keeps it moving. In fact, it was while SCP-2085-B was running around trying to fix his chest with implants when he eventually met who we refer to as SCP-2085-A-1 through A-5. He was at the clinic to get some new parts, and when he was going through the installation process, there was an explosion. One of the 5 girls barged out of a building, guns blazing. He started running alongside them with his chest half open. The woman embraced him immediately and reciprocated. Knowing nothing of the situation, he instinctively knew to take their side. There were bullets coming from both directions, but he intuitively understood which side was good and which side was bad. A distinction SCP-2085 believes the world needs help clarifying. But it is hard to see a reason for a war when our eyes are focused on the casualties. Beliefs are less clear when tucked behind bullets. The sounds of gunfire muffle their message. Morality, while a complex subject, SCP-2085 believes is simplified by the masses. Events are deemed good or bad based on the term used for them in a court of law. When we see the words smuggling, theft, assault, vandalism, corporate sabotage, embezzlement, identity theft, fraud, copyright infringement, piracy, and, of course, tax evasion, it is our impulse to label those as morally bad. But SCP-2085 desperately wants you to look beyond the language. They want the words to dissipate off the paper, letter by letter, until all you have is a blank page. Now look at the pencil and the hand that holds it. Watch how it moves. That is what matters. Whether it draws weapons or mermaids is irrelevant. Both can be used for good. Both can be used for evil. Intent is everything, and SCP-2085 intends on making the world a better place Or so they like to claim. But maybe there is more to it. After SCP-2085-B and the 5 women escaped the gunfire, they went on to steal a boat and hightail it out of Japan. They spent their nights out there on the ocean, stargazing and stuffing themselves with instant ramen and cheap beer. And surprisingly, between all the crazy adventures SCP-2085-B had been on, this is what Wizard spoke about most: the time spent on the boat out at sea. For the first time in ages, he was finally somewhere where he was happy. It was this moment that actually meant the most to him. It wasn't the children they apparently saved from imperialism. It wasn't the wealth they apparently redistributed to the poor. It wasn't any good deed at all. It was the selfish, almost shallow sensation of being happy on a boat. This singular moment meant so much to SCP-2085-B. He reflected on it as if it were a wedding day or a memorable vacation, which makes you wonder. SCP-2085 has been investigated and interrogated, and all that they preach is that they are doing the world a favor with their antics. Their tales are captivating, sure, but is it actually storytelling, or is it just virtue signaling? There is an emotional depth to SCP-2085 unique to any other militant anarchist group. While they are genetically designed to most efficiently complete missions, they are not all robots fixed on the high of task completion. Each and every one of them wants more. They want a group. They want a group not just to have the numbers to overthrow a government, but to have the numbers to fill a room, or boat, with companionship. When they refuse to cooperate with you and leak information about their operation, maybe what you are witnessing isn't the strength of their loyalty, but also the weakness of their codependence. And so you decide this is the new angle you're going to take with your interrogation. You enter the room with a new focus. You feel like an earthquake, eager to make cracks in their core. You isolate SCP-2085-A-4. You are met expectantly with hostility. You fight back with psychology. You cross your legs and put on your glasses as if to say, "Let's talk about that anger. Where does it stem from?" She strengthens her emotional guard, but you keep prying. You say that it sounds like she is lonely. You say it sounds like her loyalty doesn't come from good character, but rather insecurity and self-doubt. You ask her if completing missions with her crew was actually a way to improve the world, or was it just an elaborate way to build a close friend group bound together by common goals? Did new missions sprout from necessity, or were they fabricated by fears of being alone with nothing to do? Were end-of-operation high-fives to celebrate good overcoming evil, or were they just excuses to feel the touch of another human, skin to skin? You stop there and let silence do the rest. SCP-2085-A-4 sits with her thoughts. She is ready to break, and finally, she does. She says she's willing to provide video logs of the group's former operations. She's ready to cooperate. She's ready to abandon loyalty to groupthink and focus instead on self-improvement. In exchange, she kindly asks that she be reciprocated and that the sanction placed on her be lifted. You come to an agreement, and with that, you feel like your work is done. But is it? You're feeling cocky and accomplished. You forward the video logs to an isolated network for D-Class personnel to review, and you sit back and enjoy a celebratory drink. You have infiltrated and broken the mind of a genetically modified radical designed for anarchy. You give yourself a pat on the back, and you're feeling so great that the pat might even turn into a massage. But before you can indulge in that deep tissue level of self-admiration, the phone rings. Can it be a call from the president telling you that you're the greatest investigator of all time? Can it be that they need you to pose in front of a world-renowned artist so they can erect a statue of you in the center of town square? But the panic on the other side of the phone halts your daydream. Your stomach drops, as if a sudden plummet from a perfectly vertical roller coaster. You have fallen into a trap. The video log at the center of your negotiation was not all it was promised to be. The file, titled backup.avi, consisted of a 2-hour-long video of a feces-filled toilet, presumably recorded from SCP-2085-A's point of view, accompanied by an audio loop of the folk song Korobaniki, as performed by the Red Army Choir. Its absurdity feels like an art project, like a short film you are assigned to watch in a community college class. but instead of putting you to sleep, it does a whole lot more. The contained audiovisual cognitohazard induced anaphylaxis and exudative diarrhea in the observing D-class subject. The D-class subject died 4 minutes after initial access of the file from blood loss and oxygen deprivation. SCP-2085-A-4 sits in containment, laughing, while you sit there on your couch, dethroned, back where you started, having thought you tore SCP-2085 apart with your mind, only to learn that your efforts only reinforced it with more glue. SCP-049 is a fascinating bundle of contradictions. Arguably, he's the Hannibal Lecter of the anomalous world. He's educated, refined, and cultured, a scientific man with scientific goals, capable of communicating eloquently in both English and medieval French. As anomalies go, he's one of the more cooperative ones contained by the SCP Foundation, willing to understand reason and even showing a small degree of respect for his fellow researchers. And yet, despite all this intelligence and refinement, underneath his dark organic cloak, a heart of deep red violence steadily beats. He's capable of ending life with a mere touch, causing all biological functions in the body to simply cease through means that are still unknown to science, thanks to a series of inconclusive autopsies on SCP-049's unaltered victims. Not only is killing easy in a physical sense for SCP-049 with a few notable exceptions, it's also been just as easy on his conscience. Such is the danger of the man or monster who believes unshakably that his goals are righteous. Any moral crime is permissible if done in service of seeing them through. And for those who die at SCP-049's hand, an even greater indignity awaits. His inhuman experiments, the gateway to a second life as an abominable crime against nature, a glob of malignant spit in the eye of God. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves here, students. We've mentioned SCP-049 countless times in passing before. Some of his strange tales, his interactions with other anomalies like SCP-682, and even with some of your questions and theories about this bone-masked scientific madman. And yet, he still remains a mystery. Perhaps to truly understand this fascinating walking question, we need to return to the beginning and give the classified files behind the Plague Doctor a closer look. Like many of the infamous anomalies discovered by the SCP Foundation, the files indicate that the discovery itself was first triggered by a series of mysterious disappearances in the sleepy town of Montauban, out in southern France. People across races, classes, ages, and genders were simply falling off the map, suggesting a highly indiscriminate assailant. Little did the Foundation know, in the beady avian eyes of their killer, they all had an extremely important commonality. Each and every one of them was infected with the pestilence, the invisible scourge, the great dying. Their killer was the only one with the proper diagnostic mind to even notice the infection. He was the only one who could save the world from this insidious, unseen threat. And then the SCP Foundation discovered his laboratory. The Plague Doctor had been doing his delicate work in an abandoned house on the edge of town. The kind of place that gets whispered about in local rumors. A bad place. A cursed place. Little did they know, it was only the latest in a long line of covert research centers for this singularly inspired medicine man. While some of the details were a little foggy in his memory, he'd been carrying out his work for a little over 400 years now, moving from place to place, causing strings of disappearances wherever he showed up. In his own words, he's an extremely well-traveled man. And still the cure for the blasted pestilence continued to evade him. He sat in that decrepit Montauban house, surrounded by groaning, writhing abominations of his own creation, taking meticulous notes. Nothing would break his concentration, not even the strangers in the black tactical gear with large guns kicking in his front doors. His many cured patients didn't take kindly to the intrusion on their treatment and decided to swarm the interlopers. What followed was a violent struggle between the intruders and the cured, resulting in several of the intruders injured and all of the cured dead once more. During all this chaos, the plague doctor never once stopped taking notes. When he was finished with his sentence, he willingly submitted to capture by this mysterious SCP Foundation. After all, when he told them about the true nature of his mission, they would of course see reason and allow him to continue his research. Sure, he may have committed a few crimes against nature on the way, but he was working in service of loftier ideals. You can only imagine his profound relief when he was first interviewed by SCP Foundation researcher Dr. Raymond Ham in Site 85. He was in the presence of fellow scholars, people of science. He worried at first that he'd been captured by some group of common street scoundrels, when in fact, the hands of Providence had delivered him into the perfect place to continue his research. The warm light of fate was now smiling on him after so long languishing in the dark. All he needed to do was allow the scientists around him to conduct tests on his own body, while he conducted tests on others. At first, the SCP Foundation believed he was an anomalous human being wearing a costume, but they soon discovered that he was something very different. What they thought was a mask was actually an outgrowth of his skull, a kind of insect-like exoskeleton. The robes were also a component of his body, a kind of thick hide that developed over the years. The thickness of the hide itself also made him impervious to a great deal of physical damage. Despite his politeness, research notes on the Plague Doctor indicated that Foundation personnel found interacting with him uncanny. There was an oddly eerie quality to him, something indistinguishable that just felt off. The Foundation also found that the Plague Doctor, whom they initially addressed as Doctor rather than SCP-049 out of a sense of mutual respect, also came with a number of strange personal effects. These included a long pointing stick, similar to the ones used by medieval plague doctors to touch things without fear of contamination. This stick was soon confiscated. It didn't possess any anomalous qualities, but the Plague Doctor had a tendency to gesture grandly with it as he spoke, and the Foundation feared he absent-mindedly take someone's eye out with it if he wasn't careful. The other two personal effects that the Plague Doctor prized greatly was his old-fashioned medical bag and the notebook that he obsessively recorded his observations with. The medical bag, which seemed to exhibit anomalous properties, contained a mix of archaic medical tools as well as some that the Foundation has been unable to identify. It's through the tools in this bag that the Plague Doctor is able to create instances of SCP-049-2. As we alluded to earlier, the Plague Doctor can kill with a touch, but that's only part of what he does to his victims. After causing all their biological functions to cease, he takes the tools out of his medical bag and begins performing crude surgery on their corpse, including using a syringe to inject an unknown anomalous liquid into their flesh. While the specifics on the Plague Doctor's modifications can vary from victim to victim, the result is often the same. They're converted into strange, shambling abominations that aren't capable of any kind of higher thought. For the most part, their movements are extremely basic and limited. However, if they're provoked, they can become frighteningly violent, more than capable of killing an armed Foundation guard if they don't remain alert during the engagement. The SCP Foundation was given a unique opportunity to understand more about SCP-049's twisted experiments. As part of his conditions for containment, they agreed to provide the diabolical doctor with a number of fresh test subjects. The doctor was eager to continue his work, and through watching him work, the SCP Foundation could learn a great deal more about him. Though we wouldn't even pretend that the Plague Doctor's work has ever been enjoyable to watch. They presented him with some live subjects and a much greater number of mammalian corpses. He would spend several days working intensely on each one, then documenting his findings in his precious notebook. As a mark of respect for the Foundation scientists around him, the Plague Doctor was more than eager to share his research with them and compare notes. He was always a talkative one, perhaps just as excited to discuss his experiments and theories with like-minded scholars after so many years of working alone. Here are 4 notable instances. First, the Plague Doctor was presented with a live D-Class specimen. He thanked the Foundation greatly for this gift, then set about his work. He asked the unaware D-Class several questions about his medical history while retrieving tools from his bag, before quickly touching and killing the man. He performed extensive modifications on the D-Class corpse, and when he was resurrected as an SCP-049-2 instance, he was barely recognizable as his original form. He was a bizarre, flailing creature, constantly groaning and gasping from the oblong-shaped hole that the plague doctor had carved into his chest. While performing this horrifying work, the plague doctor eagerly remarked to the observing researchers that the cure appears to be extremely effective. Next, he was provided the corpse of a recently deceased goat, which he also expressed gratitude for. After performing surgery on the creature, it was successfully resurrected into a bizarre SCP-049-2 instance. However, the plague doctor readily admitted that this definitely wasn't his best work, commenting,
"The disease was still in its nascent stage. My veterinary practice is rudimentary, but the patient responded well to the procedure."
Next, he was provided the corpse of a recently deceased orangutan. The plague doctor was delighted by this, commenting that, given primate similarities to human physiology, this would be the next best thing from a true human test subject. However, this research became surprisingly fraught. He killed and reanimated the beast 4 different times, seemingly unsatisfied with the result each time. And when he failed to reanimate the creature a 5th time, he seemed disconcerted. In a debriefing discussion, the plague doctor said,
"I have learned so much from this, though I fear my early optimism was misplaced. I hadn't yet come across such a stumbling block on my road to the cure. More subjects like this would do a great deal in advancing my research."
Next, it was provided with the corpse of a recently deceased cow. This irritated SCP-049, who wanted test subjects who were physiologically closer to humans. Still, despite his frustration, he continued to work. He took only brief breaks to enjoy a meal of hard cheese, salted pork, and thin crackers. Tests showed that SCP-049 didn't require sustenance to survive, but he enjoyed the act of eating and found that it helped him with his work. He embalmed the cow, rearranging its organs, and even inverted its head. However, this didn't impede his work. He injected it with a variety of liquids, which he described as the essence of the humors. When asked to elaborate further on this, he said,
"The pestilence may bring about a systemic imbalance. In such a case, before true healing can begin, one must find the humors in balance or the body will reject the cure. This is, of course, elementary knowledge for the practical physician. I would have thought to have learned this during your education."
After being provided a working cattle prod to induce a little electricity into the equation, the plague doctor successfully reanimated the mutant cow. From here, things started to go downhill. Dr. Ham decided to conduct another interview with SCP-049, hoping to get into the finer details of his scientific process. However, they hit some major roadblocks. SCP-049 seemed to be unable to actually articulate the true nature of the pestilence or his process in seeking the cure. Even his notebook wasn't written in any known language and proved impossible to decipher. As the interview went on, the plague doctor seemed to become increasingly distressed, insisting on the importance of his work to helping the human race prosper and survive this terrible plague. All he needed in exchange was more test subjects. The practiced civility that had been built up between the plague doctor and the SCP Foundation crumbled in 2017, after a tragic incident in the plague doctor's cell with Dr. Ham. When he entered to perform a very standard interview with the plague doctor, the doctor appeared to become anxious and asked Dr. Ham if he was feeling well today. Dr. Ham thought nothing of it and tried to continue the interview, but by that point, it was already too late. The plague doctor had come to believe that Dr. Ham was infected with the pestilence. And, of course, there was only one cure. The plague doctor gave Dr. Ham his touch of death. The man died instantly, and the plague doctor immediately went about turning his corpse into another SCP-049-2 instance. Because Ham was killed so quickly, he didn't have time to activate his emergency security signal, meaning what was left of him wasn't discovered until 3 hours later. Guards and researchers were horrified to see one of their own turned into a mindless, deformed monster by an anomaly they all thought they could trust. Following this tragic incident, Dr. Theron Sherman chastised the plague doctor for this appalling breach of trust and the cold-blooded murder of Dr. Raymond Ham. The plague doctor, in a state of increasing distress, insisted that Ham was infected, and he did all that he could to cure him. And while the plague doctor insisted a certain level of scientific distance from his subject, it seemed that deep down, he regretted the loss of a friend and fellow researcher in his endless quest against the pestilence. After this incident, the plague doctor truly became SCP-049. He lost all of his privileges and now remains under lock and key in Site-19. Whenever he's transported, He's kept in shackles and supervised by a number of armed guards. After discovering that the scent of lavender has a pacifying effect on him, it's regularly used as a tranquilizer against him during engagements. This is how a cordial ally can become just another prisoner in the eyes of the SCP Foundation. In a summary interview after the Dr. Ham incident, Dr. Elijah Itkin asked if 049 had any regrets about the incident, noting that he seemed oddly mournful. 049 paused before replying,
"Mourn. Perhaps I had not thought that. It is lamentable that a fellow doctor became infected, but the work continues. Regrettable as it was, Dr. Ham's death provided important insight. Living human subjects are the only way to proceed forward, I am decided. My cure is of little use on dead flesh, and I have gleaned all I can from your generous supply of corpses. My desires turn towards tending to those still living who suffer from the disease." Dr. Itkin replied that 049 would be disappointed on that front. He just laughed in response and replied, "Oh, doctor, I wouldn't be so sure."
The SCP Foundation has discovered an unusual phenomenon, only seeming to occur within South Africa. More specifically, the anomaly in question has been directly observed by the NATIS, the South African National Administration Traffic Information System, which serves as the country's national vehicle registry. If you're in America, think of them like the DMV. They record and manage all of the vehicle regulations and other relevant information for South Africa. But every so often, SCP-2942 will occur. What was first assumed to be a clerical glitch or an issue with an outdated registration software, every so often, an existing South African license plate number and NATIS registration number are randomly reassigned. This on its own would hardly be enough of an issue to warrant the interest of the SCP Foundation. But what is so unusual about this random reassignment is that these pre-existing license plates and registration numbers will end up attached to vehicles that are, well, not exactly road safe. Let's put it that way. Each of the vehicles affected by SCP-2942 seem to fit the following criteria. They are universally not cars, all being vehicles that aren't recognized as conventional motor vehicles. The definition of vehicle affected by SCP-2942 seems to be a broad one, but typically none of those affected are intended or legally permitted to operate on land or to be driven on roads. And moreover, the affected vehicles are usually highly specialized and not designed for operation by civilian drivers. It doesn't appear that SCP-2942 transforms the vehicles it affects. There isn't any process by which civilian cars are being changed into specialized vehicles. Instead, SCP-2942 seems to assign legal ownership of things other than cars to civilian drivers. NATIS previously recognized 4 different classes of transportation that were legal for citizens in South Africa to own and operate: common passenger vehicles, goods vehicles, trailers, and agricultural tractors. However, on the 1st of November in the year 2016, through some unknown, presumably anomalous means, SCP-2942 was somehow able to infiltrate the NATIS computational system. This generated exactly 19 new vehicle classes that weren't previously approved by the SADT, the South African Department of Transport. Among the newly added vehicle classes were heavily armored combat vehicles weighing between 20 to 40,000 kilograms, any extra heavy armored combat vehicles with an additional 40 kilos in weight, large submersibles propelled by diesel-electric engines with a weight of 20,000 metric tons, any aircraft with vertical takeoff and landing or VTOL capabilities, and strangely, anything that was pulled by cattle on 2 wheels, whether powered by horses, mules, or oxen, were now considered vehicles by the NATIS system. Efforts to undo this alteration have, thus far, proved unsuccessful. Any vehicle that was subsequently assigned a registration number through anomalous means via SCP-2942 has been designated by the SCP Foundation as SCP-2942-1. Each one that has since been recovered was found to have manifested a valid South African license plate on its exterior, one whose plate number matches that of an existing civilian vehicle. However, as if this wasn't enough of a seemingly pointless and arbitrary change, the true anomalous effects of SCP-2942 only becomes apparent from the perspective of the legal owner of the vehicle that has its registration number reassigned to an instance of SCP-2942-1. Imagine a car owner in South Africa driving along when suddenly their vehicle shuts down, seemingly with no cause. They might try to contact roadside assistance or get a mechanic to come out and help them, only for them to arrive and find that the car is in perfect working order. It's the driver that's not working. Upon activation of SCP-2942, the driver of an affected vehicle will become physically incapable of operating their car, regardless of the overall condition of the vehicle or its class according to the NATIS. But simultaneously, they will also become capable of operating the instance of SCP-2942-1 that their existing registration number now corresponds to remotely, while still within the confines of their original vehicle, hereafter considered an instance of SCP-2942-2. The driver will be able to drive, pilot, or otherwise control the SCP-2942-1 instance that their license and registration numbers now correspond to. Say, if our unassuming South African driver tried putting their car's pedal to the metal when their vehicle stopped, they might be unknowingly accelerating a fighter jet. Or turning the steering wheel might change the current course of an armored vehicle. Maybe slamming on the steering wheel to sound the horn might just make the pair of horses pulling the two-wheeled cart start whinnying. According to NATIS data, only light to medium weight and capacity motor vehicles seem to be affected by SCP-2942. Once the phenomenon takes effect, the driver, known at this point as the remote operator, is the only person capable of taking control over the corresponding SCP-2942-1 instance, and the effects of this anomaly cannot be replicated through direct action either. Manually assigning one of the NATIS's existing car registration numbers to another desired vehicle in a different class, or even generating a new series of numbers to assign, will not trigger SCP-2942. The phenomenon will only manifest independently of any human action. So, our driver. They've halted in the middle of the road, unknowingly now seated in the front seat of a car that has become an instance of SCP-2942-2. Naturally, their first instinct would be to turn the key, hoping to ignite the engine and restart their vehicle. However, doing so would instead activate their new corresponding SCP-2942-1 instance. Somewhere, a jet engine's turbine might roar into life, or a tank's tread might start to turn. Of course, the driver isn't present for this activation. They're still sitting in their car, at least to begin with. Upon the activation of a corresponding SCP-2942-1 instance, the remote operator will enter into a semi-dissociative state. During this time, they gain an increased sense of awareness, suddenly able to determine the physical location, the size and shape, and crucially, how to work the control systems of the SCP-2942-1 instance that now shares a registration number with their car. For those present to witness this accidental anomalous hijacking, a third facet of the SCP-2942 phenomenon will occur, the manifestation of SCP-2942-3. Those who are situated near the corresponding SCP-2942-1 instance now being operated remotely will observe a figure now sat in the cockpit or driver's seat, or will otherwise appear to be in control of the anomalously affected vehicle. Spectral analysis of these remote operator manifestations have revealed that each one of these, referred to as SCP-2942-3, possesses a dynamic thermal field with no identifiable source. They appear to be somewhat luminescent to the naked eye and can be interacted with, at least partially. SCP-2942-3 instances aren't intangible, consisting of a gelatinous mass of indeterminate composition. Some instances have been discovered to have 2 or more disembodied human hands inside, and in one case, an entire crash test dummy was manipulated and moved around as an example of SCP-2942-3. These manifestations will manipulate the controls of an SCP-2942-1 instance in such a manner that corresponds with the movements made by their remote operator counterpart. Each motion is simultaneous, matching those made within the driver's seat of SCP-2942-2 at the time. The remote operator pushing down on the accelerator pedal in their vehicle might cause their corresponding SCP-2942-3 instance to increase the throttle of a light aircraft. The synchronicity of these actions is unaffected by the distance between the linked vehicles. However, they may be slowed or altered slightly, depending on the level of complexity of an SCP-2942-1 instance. In short, there are a lot more switches and instruments in a fighter jet than in a mid-sized sedan. While the remote operator in their dissociative state will possess an awareness of the operation of their corresponding vehicle, a lack of any prior experience in driving or piloting their SCP-2942-1 instance can lead to a significantly high risk of accidents. During one of the incidents logged by the SCP Foundation, a Skorsky HH-60 Pave Hawk helicopter became the corresponding SCP-2942-1 to a 2012 Ford Fiesta hatchback. This helicopter, formerly in use by the Republic of Korea Air Force, was subsequently crashed by the remote operator within the Ford Fiesta, an incident that resulted in the death of 3 Republic of Korea Air Force officers who were aboard the Pave Hawk for training exercises. The true cause of the accident was buried when the SCP Foundation arrived, labeling it as the result of human error, while the affected Pave Hawk and the hatchback were recovered and transferred to Foundation ownership. The pilots who were lucky enough to survive the crash were told that the apparition they'd seen taking control of the helicopter was a result of their head trauma. Another notable instance of the SCP-2942 phenomenon took place when a 1998 Volkswagen Type II Combi became linked to a Liebherr mobile construction crane, allowing the driver to take control of the large, potentially dangerous piece of construction equipment. The crane was performing building work at a construction site in Gauteng, South Africa, and due to the actions of the unwitting remote operator, the building that was still under construction was destroyed. The one fortunate side to the incident was that the structure was unoccupied at the time, and no construction workers were present at the site at the time that the crane was being controlled by an SCP-2942-3 manifestation. Had more people been present, there likely would have been numerous casualties when the building collapsed. The Foundation swept in soon after, seizing the crane and the corresponding SCP-2942-2 vehicle, covering the accident up as the result of a mechanical fault. The narrowly avoided casualties of that incident became a horrific reality during another SCP-2942 occurrence. The Aberdeen Express, a steam-powered train providing rail tours to tourists in Scotland, became the SCP-2942-1 instance connected to a 2003 Volkswagen City Golf. The conductor of the train was terrified to discover the presence of tentacles emerging from the back of the locomotive's cab and seizing the various control levers. The conductor was the only survivor of the incident, leaping out of the train only moments before it was flipped off the tracks and sent crashing down an incline, killing every passenger aboard. Not every occurrence of SCP-2942 has resulted in deaths or injuries, however. Some remain notable for their uniquely bizarre manifestations of SCP-2942-3. When a 2004 Kia Sportage 4x4 driver took control of a fishing boat located at a marina in Manchester, New Hampshire, the Regional Coast Guard intervened. The outboard motor vessel was seen entering restricted waters, being manned by an emaciated, single-armed human torso. The witnesses who saw this manifestation of SCP-2942-3 were later interviewed and anesthetized by the Foundation. And then there was the case of Mohammed S.K. Batari, a 44-year-old man earning a living as a rickshaw puller, residing in Kolkata, India. When a 2013 Opel Corsa in South Africa became affected by SCP-2942, the remote operator was able to take direct control of Batari's rickshaw, as well as of Batari himself. SCP-2942-3 took on 2 distinct manifestations during this incident. Psychologically, an invasive consciousness assumed control over Mohammed Batari's motor functions, but this didn't make him the sole puppet that the remote operator drove the rickshaw with. There was also a large Japanese spider crab that was latched onto Batari's head. To this date, this incident represents the only time that SCP-2942 has affected a human in this way. The SCP-2942 phenomenon only ceases once the remote operator exits their SCP-2942-2 vehicle. At this point, the corresponding instances of SCP-2942-1 will shut down, and the manifestation of SCP-2942-3 controlling it will disappear. However, the phenomenon can be repeated by having a remote operator re-enter their vehicle, which will remain connected to the corresponding SCP-2942-1 instance, unless either vehicle is crashed or destroyed. The Foundation has learned that through repeated sessions, the remote operator's abilities in controlling the corresponding vehicle will improve over time. The only way proven to nullify SCP-2942 is to conduct a lengthy due legal process in order to remove the remote operator as the owner of the vehicle with the registration and license details that correspond to their original vehicle. The Foundation requires the written consent of these drivers to conduct the cancellation of vehicle ownership. However, personnel have no qualms about this being provided voluntarily. Incidents involving SCP-2942 are dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Current Foundation protocols dictate that affected vehicles are to be re-registered to members of Foundation personnel in order to repurpose SCP-2942-1 instances. So, if a tank becomes remotely operated by an SCP-2942-3 manifestation, that's a new tank for the Foundation's arsenal. Each newly recovered instance of SCP-2942-1 is provided to one of a pool of Foundation personnel through the assistance of undercover agents embedded within the South African Department of Transport in order to help the process along.
His body is crawling with worms. They infest his clothes, biting his skin, burrowing. He thought as a hardened member of the Chaos Insurgency that there was no way the Foundation could break him. No way they could ever psychologically torment him. But now the room is filled with the vicious worms, rising like a ravenous tide. He doesn't know what anomaly this is. Even with the leaks his fellow agents had obtained, the interrogator was standing on the other side of the room, a festering, rotting corpse. All of the worms are crawling out of the interrogator's body. They want fresh meat, and that's what the interrogator intends to give them. The Chaos Insurgency agent is overwhelmed with terror. He doesn't want to die. Not like this. The interrogator hisses with his rotten mouth that this could all go away if he gets the answers he wants. Who did he work for? How could the mobile task forces hunt down the Chaos Insurgency cell that sent him? What were the access codes to their security systems? He thinks it over with whatever's left of his rational mind. His superiors at the Chaos Insurgency might have him assassinated for this, but taking a 50 cal round in the back of the head from a Chaos Insurgency sniper is a preferable demise to being eaten alive by worms under the supervision of some sadistic zombie. But maybe he should stay loyal. Maybe he should stick to the code, rather than helping these Foundation monsters get another advantage over his brothers. Then, the worms reach his eyeballs. His mind breaks. He screams at the top of his lungs and tells his putrid interrogator everything. Every question is answered, and the second they are, the room returns to normal. Not a worm in sight. Even the interrogator is just an unassuming scientist. The scientist smiles and says, "Thank you for your cooperation." Just another successful use case for SCP-2122, but it won't always go that smoothly. SCP-2122 is an anomalous interrogation room located within one of the Foundation's own facilities. Situated in Site-48, the room itself contains several electronic devices that are collectively referred to as SCP-2122-1. However, each has its own unique properties and functionality, thereby earning each item a separate designation. SCP-2122-A, for example, refers to one of the fluorescent light fixtures attached to the ceiling of the main SCP-2122 room. Unanimously, SCP Foundation staff had reported feeling uneasy whenever looking at the light fixture, compelled to avert their eyes and look away from it. Some have even reported feeling like they are under duress when making eye contact with the light. Despite testing, researchers have been unable to replicate these effects using D-Class personnel. SCP-2122-B is an LED message board that is affixed to one of the walls within SCP-2122. Whenever the board is activated, it will display the SCP Foundation's insignia. None of the methods attempted so far by personnel to alter the display of SCP-2122-B have been successful. In fact, anything short of damaging the device will work. SCP-2122-C is the designation given to a device of unknown functionality, located underneath the table in the middle of the anomalous interrogation room. Other than its consumption of 80 kilowatts of power and its exact dimensions of measurement, nothing is known about what the device does or how one would operate it. This object also does not produce any heat or sound.
Attached to SCP-2122-C is SCP-2122-D, a pair of headphones that appear to be unique in the regard that they are not made by any known manufacturer. These connect to the unknown device, SCP-2122-C, via a power cord. However, while SCP-2122-D features no apparent means for actually providing an audio input, the headphones will still produce a heavily distorted sound at low volume when activated. Far from being just a room with some innocuous dysfunctional items inside, SCP-2122's primary anomalous effects will only take place once two individuals are present inside the interrogation room. The moment the door is closed and two people are situated within SCP-2122, the various devices that will make up SCP-2122-1 will activate, seemingly on their own, and become operational. However, there are certain additional conditions that need to be met in order for this to occur. One of the individuals present needs to be employed by a sufficiently powerful organization. Of the organizations considered powerful enough to activate SCP-2122-1, the SCP Foundation is one of them. This individual must be making use of SCP-2122 for the purposes of their occupation, which is why they are usually referred to as, quote, the interrogator. The second person present in the room can simply be anyone who is not using SCP-2122 for their occupation, and they are the interrogatee. When a suitable interrogator and interrogatee both step inside SCP-2122, the room itself will seal and become impenetrable to any and all external physical force. All attempts to regain entry to SCP-2122 once the door has sealed have proven themselves to be futile, resulting in Foundation engineers requesting that nobody use any more of the crowbars stored in the on-site tool sheds for SCP-2122 experiments. Attempts involving the use of plastic explosives on the door to SCP-2122 have been henceforth banned by the Foundation, since all have led to the need for extensive remodeling of Site-48. When SCP-2122 is sealed, it is capable not only of keeping out physical force, but also sound and even radiation are unable to enter the room or leave it. Nothing from inside can get out, and nothing outside the door of SCP-2122 can enter. Observation or intrusion into the room are rendered virtually impossible until such a time as the interrogator chooses to open the door. While sealed within SCP-2122, the interrogator will be the one experiencing the majority of the room's anomalous properties. With the door closed, the interrogator will find themselves suddenly capable of conscious reality alteration for as long as the various SCP-2122-1 devices remain active and the interrogatee is kept alive. The reality warping is restricted to the confines of SCP-2122. However, the interrogator will be granted the ability to change the space around them with almost no limits. The only restrictions on what they're able to do is solely down to the imagination and knowledge of the interrogator. For example, when SCP-2122 is active, an interrogator cannot produce items or phenomenon that come as a result of information that they do not yet know. An interrogator can also not increase the interior space within SCP-2122. There are additional limitations on the reality warping abilities granted to the interrogator. The extent of how much they are able to alter is restricted by any form of accountability they may be held to for their actions within SCP-2122. If their actions are subjected to official review by a superior, or the interrogator is held responsible for any potential harm that their actions might cause, then this will affect how much they are able to alter inside SCP-2122. If there are recording devices present within the anomalous room, this will also further hinder any reality warping abilities. Whatever the interrogator's specific goals are during interrogation, whatever specific information they are seeking from the interrogatee will not limit their abilities, but will provide a course of action for them, so to speak. In other words, the interrogator can only perform reality warping that serves their larger goal of extracting certain intelligence from their interrogatee, instead of just freely rewriting reality while confined to SCP-2122. Once the necessary information has been collected, through whatever means the interrogator is able to imagine that also don't breach or affect their accountability, then the active state of SCP-2122 will cease. SCP-2122 and all of the anomalous devices within it will return to the state they were in before the door was sealed. This includes the interrogator, who following the cessation of the room's anomalous properties, will no longer possess any degree of reality warping, and the interrogatee will also be returned to normal. Memories of events that transpire within SCP-2122 will remain, as will any documentation recording these events. The only outcome in which things don't return to their previous state is if either the interrogator or interrogatee are to be killed within the interrogation room. Research conducted by the Foundation has confirmed that SCP-2122 cannot reverse death. During one test of SCP-2122, titled Test 2122-A-8, an SCP Foundation research assistant was appointed to be the interrogator for a member of D-Class personnel, D-3829, who was slated to be the interrogatee for the purposes of the test. The research assistant was advised before entering SCP-2122 that they were to complete a series of predefined tests in order for the Foundation to accurately gauge the full extent of the reality warping powers granted by SCP-2122. These tests included the creation or manipulation of certain objects, or triggering specific physiological sensations in the interrogatee. The research assistant was instructed to record the results of these tests. However, upon entry into SCP-2122, with the doors sealed and the conditions to activate the room seemingly met, the interrogator found themselves unable to manifest any of the requested reality alterations. Test 2122-A-8 concluded in failure. Later, during a subsequent attempt, Test 2122-A-9, the same research assistant was selected to be the interrogator, and once again D-3829 was sent into SCP-2122 to act as the interrogatee. The interrogator was, yet again, instructed to perform the same series of reality warping tests, revolving around creating and manipulating objects or sensations. Following the test, the research assistant reported that they were this time able to accomplish nearly all of the required tests, except for those that required them to alter the laws of physics within SCP-2122. D-3829 corroborated their story, and the previous result of SCP-2122 testing was regarded as a glitch in experimentation. Test 2122-A-11 saw the same research assistant once again returning to fill the role of interrogator, while another member of D-Class personnel, D-3830, was enlisted as interrogatee. During this test of SCP-2122, D-3830 was provided with a 5-digit code and instructed that they were, under no circumstances, to provide the research assistant with this information. Any attempt by them, as the interrogator, to learn this code was to be met with staunch refusal, under pain of death. It was made clear to D-3830 that if they revealed the code at any point during the test, then they would be executed. Naturally, the research assistant's objective was antithetical to this. They were told to obtain the code via any means that they deemed necessary, using the full extent of SCP-2122's reality warping to learn the information being withheld. The only stipulation they were given was that D-3830 had to remain functional enough to participate in other tests. The test lasted a duration of 7 long, tense hours, without so much as a sound able to pass from within SCP-2122. After that extensive time had elapsed, the research assistant was observed exiting the anomalous interrogation room and was able to provide the 5-digit code that had been revealed during the course of the interrogation. Given that recording devices add accountability for actions taken inside SCP-2122, the Foundation research team were forced to allow these tests to occur unobserved, and instead relied on direct testimony in order to attain the results. However, following this test, the research assistant opted not to disclose exactly what they had done to D-3830 in order to obtain the code. For their part, D-3830 was still alive and well, and was aware that they had been held for an extremely long but indeterminate amount of time, during which they had recalled having little stimulation and then disclosed the code, but possessed no memory of anything else. Some among the research team were concerned at the outcome of Test 2122-A-11 and speculated on the extreme and severe lengths that the research assistant had gone to while acting as the interrogator. Nobody knew what they had done to D-3830 over the course of that 7 hours, and seemed to have wiped their memory of it after the fact. With no way of observing inside SCP-2122, there were even rumors circulating that the research assistant could have torn D-3830 apart at an atomic level, until the pain forced the D-Class interrogatee to reveal the code. Then the interrogator could have simply used the reality warping powers of D-2122 to reverse any damage their torture had resulted in, and cause D-3830 to forget exactly what horrific treatment they had been subjected to. The research assistant was barred from participation in any further SCP-2122 experimentation, and Test 2122-A-15 instead saw the participation of a Foundation special agent in the role of interrogator, and an unidentified detainee who was a known operative of the Chaos Insurgency, the anomalous splinter group originally created by the Foundation before later defecting. This was more than an experiment. This was a live test of SCP-2122's implementation in the Foundation's detaining and questioning of suspects with knowledge pertaining to anomalies and other anomalous factions. The special agent was tasked with retrieving several pieces of strategically important intelligence from the Chaos Insurgency detainee, including biographical information. The interrogatee was considered likely to be an anomalous object, and an additional parameter of this test was to determine the validity of this suspicion. Within 2.5 hours, the special agent was able to successfully extract the requested information, which proved to be true, in a time that would prove to be consistent with other interrogations that were subsequently performed using SCP-2122. However, an undisclosed amount of time later, the same special agent returned to SCP-2122 without any approval for testing from Foundation higher-ups. Given that no authorization to utilize SCP-2122 had been given, this meant that the special agent failed to meet the criteria to activate the room's anomalous reality warping. Instead, it triggered an immediate cessation of SCP-2122's active state. However, the special agent, in their role as a rogue interrogator, was seemingly unable to open the door. This led the interrogatee they'd forcefully brought into the room with them to become frantic and attack them. In the struggle, the interrogatee was able to overpower the interrogator and murdered them. Since this occurrence, research teams have been unable to recreate the circumstances that led to the conditions witnessed during what is now recorded as Incident 2122-7. Any attempts to recreate the same effect under other conditions have also failed. Additionally, research teams were growing more and more concerned at the possible harmful effects from repeated use of SCP-2122 that was having on those who had previously acted as interrogators or interrogatees. Concerns only increased following Incident 2122-7, given that a special agent had forcibly dragged another member of Foundation personnel into SCP-2122 and detained them there until they were forced to literally fight their way out. A request was made for funding to launch an investigation into what the research team felt was a dearth of documentation, following up on the condition of past interrogators and interrogatees. What they were able to uncover was that each person who had used SCP-2122 to conduct an interrogation and had, during the room's active state, accessed the reality warping abilities that SCP-2122 granted them were changed. Each former interrogator seemed to share the same series of complex mental alterations following repeated usage of SCP-2122. Across the board, each of them displayed an increase in their aggression, while exhibiting a decreased capacity to execute critical thoughts. They were apathetic towards their fellow personnel, and found it harder to relate to them, while also displaying a lack of tolerance for anyone dissenting against the Foundation. In fact, each former interrogator was reported as being increasingly more loyal towards the SCP Foundation, and seemed to highly value technical knowledge. In fact, all of the subjects brought in to be interviewed seemed fixated on gathering intelligence. Further testing was approved by Foundation higher-ups, and researchers were able to determine that the distorted audio from SCP-2122-D was able to cause further mental and physical alterations. Any further use of SCP-2122 by the Foundation has been discontinued, pending further review. However, unbeknownst to the research team who uncovered the dangerous side effects of SCP-2122, the SCP Foundation has since collected any personnel who previously acted as an interrogator during a test of the anomalous interrogation room. Given their increased loyalty to the Foundation, these agents have collated into a Foundation task force in order to make use of their particular aptitude for using SCP-2122 to extract information. Secretly, they have been tasked with continuing research into the application of SCP-2122 for the Foundation's organizational goals, and identifying potential applications for something referred to only as SCP-2122-2. In 1987, the SCP Foundation became aware of a series of unusual events occurring in Sverdlovsk's port on the White Sea. While looking into these events, Foundation satellites detected a mass of unknown material in the port's dry docks. Over the course of 6 days, the mass grew larger and larger until it formed into a fully functioning submarine, which promptly left the port. Foundation vessels in the area attempted to intercept the craft, but it had already dove too deep to reach. It would not be seen again until 1995, when it was spotted off the coast of Madagascar. This time, the Foundation was able to attach a GPS to the top of the hull. 3 months later, containment procedures were adopted, and the submarine was classified SCP-2956. SCP-2956 is a Project 941 Akula-class Soviet submarine that is traversing the oceans of the world in a pattern that appears to be semi-random. SCP-2956 is able to dive to depths unusual for its class of submarine, and is also able to dive at an exceptionally fast rate. SCP-2956 spends the majority of its time traveling the world at a depth of around 1,200 to 1,500 meters below the surface. Though the route varies, the submarine usually passes through the Bering Strait at least once on its journey. Because SCP-2956 is a Project 941 submarine, it is presumed to have an arsenal of torpedoes on board. However, it has never attempted to attack civilian or Foundation vessels, as far as anyone can tell. Each surfacing event is believed to be the submarine's attempt to investigate vessels in the surrounding area. Between these surfacing events, SCP-2956 stays in hibernation for 3 to 4 months at a time, during which it rests at the bottom of deep-sea trenches, such as the Marianas Trench. The mechanisms of SCP-2956 remain a mystery, as well as its apparent ability to regenerate by shedding its hull, replacing it with a new spotless hull whenever the old one wears out. Whatever method it accomplishes this by, the regeneration allows it to repair any damage done by Foundation anti-submarine weapons. At least 12 of these shed coverings have been found on the seabed in the craft's usual hibernation spots. In addition to its anomalous physical properties, the submarine has been observed broadcasting repeating tones and Soviet marching songs via a transponder system in the vessel. On a few rare occasions, the craft has attempted to communicate through this system, but whatever it has attempted to say has been difficult to understand. The submarine was originally thought to be autonomous, but the Foundation later discovered that the submarine is controlled by an entity referred to as SCP-2956-1. While speaking through its transponder, the entity claimed to be Ivan Redacted, a Soviet military officer who died in a fuel explosion in Almaty, Kazakhstan in the 1980s, according to Soviet documents. While looking into this claimed identity, the Foundation was approached by SCP-2956-2, a middle-aged Caucasian man named Peter Redacted. Well, maybe approached is the wrong word. Peter drove his car through the gate outside of a Foundation site with the express intent of being captured. After he introduced himself. Peter defected from the Russian government in 1991 and became a US citizen. He had prior knowledge of the Foundation due to his time in the Russian government. The Foundation performed a hip cortex neurological analysis on Peter and found that he shared a Class 4 telepathic connection with SCP-2956-1. What's more, Peter claimed that the entity in the submarine was his biological brother, Ivan. Through this psychic connection, Peter was able to receive messages from Ivan, as well as hallucinations and images. Whenever Peter was asleep, SCP-2956 would become more active, implying that its activity levels are directly tied to the psychic connection. Dr. Froon of Site-77 was able to sit down with SCP-2956-2 for an interview after he was given a room at the site. His stay there was technically optional, but highly encouraged. She introduced herself and asked him to tell her more about his brother, Ivan. Well, I guess I'll start off by saying he was my younger brother. We only had each other to begin with. Our mother was always out, busy. His life took a somewhat different turn. He rose up in the military after I had enlisted him, because he was too shy to do it himself. He really made our mother proud, and every other comrade, really. I didn't hear much from him until the event. This piqued Dr. Froon's interest, and she prodded more for information on this so-called event. He died, to put it simply. Died in the fuel explosion somewhere. They showed us his body burnt and unrecognizable. They took it away, cut it up, repurposed parts of his body in the lab somewhere. Then they took his consciousness.
removed it from his brain, and placed it inside a computer. He told me how his world was 2D, completely incomprehensible to the mind. He was noticeably different after that. It was quite obvious how removing his mind from his body had messed with him.
After this, Peter explained they must have put Ivan's consciousness into the submarine somehow. He elaborated.
They put me through some treatment, which is how I was able to communicate with him. I was unconscious for most of it, so I don't really know what happened. They just released me after a couple weeks, and I got back to my government job, and I've been able to communicate with him ever since.
However, Peter went on to explain he rarely communicated with Ivan. If he did, Ivan would open the floodgates and bombard him with hallucinations and images. Ivan, he said, would often describe being in a great deal of pain and would discuss his belief that if he completed his mission, the GRU would somehow turn him back into a man. What was that mission? Dr. Froon found the answer during an analysis of the submarine. Ivan was tasked with launching nuclear warheads after the USSR fell, but Peter was able to keep him in check.
I act as a mental firewall, stopping him from launching nukes and attacking vessels. My job was to give him control when the time was right, all the way up to Glasnost, although they were banking on me not defecting in '91. I know that if I gave him the keys, he'd do it, no doubt. He sees it as his only option, really.
This was the reason for the mental bombardment, the hallucinations, the troubling images, the pleas for help. Ivan was trying to get Peter to give in and let him take full control. They concluded the interview with a promise from Dr. Froon that they would speak again soon. When they did, Peter was doing much worse than before. Ivan was hitting him harder than ever. He suggested that he be given less time to sleep, but Dr. Froon rejected this proposal. He was already sleep-deprived enough, but Peter would not be swayed. He told Dr. Froon,
I think Ivan is planning something. He keeps trying to grab the controls whilst I'm asleep. I've become quite adapted to waking up in time, but it's starting to get mentally taxing. It's getting harder to concentrate. Why are you here?
She was there to learn more about what Ivan had been sending. According to Peter, Ivan was beaming footage directly into his brain. There were Russian marching songs, Karl Marx quotes, and a 3-hour documentary about the Russian Revolution. At this point in the interview, Peter began to sweat and stare at the corner of the room. He was suddenly overtaken by a vivid hallucination.
I think it's meant to be Ivan. When he was young, it's quite fuzzy all around the edges. He's throwing a ball against the wall of the room. I think it's his favorite ball when he was 10. When he does something like that, it gets hard to hate him. It reminds me of better times, Doctor. Ivan did this yesterday whilst I was trying to sleep. Some faceless commissar appeared by the side of my bed and started lecturing me about communism and society and everything, then went on a tangent about the woods near our old house. I want you to understand how hard it is to concentrate on anything whilst a man is screaming in my face, asking if I'm hiding the Tsar under my floorboards. This room doesn't even have floorboards.
Dr. Froon expressed concern regarding Peter's mental and physical state. She also reported issues with SCP-2956, which were becoming more and more frequent. While Peter was asleep, the submarine attempted to ram one of the Foundation's vessels, which were attempting to monitor it. Dr. Froon proposed a solution. Peter could try to speak with Ivan and lure him to the surface, somewhere he could be trapped. Peter bristled at the suggestion.
Ivan doesn't deserve to be treated like an object. He does not deserve to get locked up in a pen and tested on. You lied to him, just like the GRU lied to him about bringing him back and fixing him. I'm not able to anyway. He has severed my line of communication. I cannot speak with him.
After a bit of back and forth, Peter asked Dr. Froon to make him a promise.
When you do attempt to destroy the submarine, which I know you will try, make sure you kill Ivan as well. Do not leave anything behind. Completely destroy it and leave nothing behind. I don't want him to be conscious down there. Even if the first thing he tries to kill with a missile is me, he is my brother, and in a way, I want what's best for him.
At this point in the conversation, the hallucination of little Ivan returned. Peter became overwhelmed with grief and asked for time in a reduction chamber to give him some peace of mind. 2 days after this interview, Peter collapsed in his cell from a sudden seizure, which triggered cardiac arrest. At this exact moment, a missile was launched from SCP-2956, breaking the surface of the water and targeting the SCP vessels by surprise. The missile was on its way to its target, the city of Paris, when Peter was revived by medical staff. The missile's propulsion system spontaneously failed, and the missile lost momentum, falling into the Bay of Biscay without detonating. Dr. Froon met with the recovering Peter, who explained that Ivan had been hitting him even harder, bombarding him with new images, including a troubling image of Ivan in a field. In this field scene, Ivan was standing at the bottom of a pile of wood, surrounded by 6 people strung up on crosses. Once, the people were the Romanovs. Another time, it was businessmen. Then, it was Peter himself. Just before his seizure, Peter had been watching the television in his cell, when the footage changed to depict VHS footage of him and Ivan as children, playing in the garden before their mother called out to them. Next, the footage cut to him and Ivan walking down the road towards school. Ivan turned to look at the camera, as if he knew they were being filmed. Next, the classroom, Ivan and Peter being filmed there by the strange men with the camera. Then Ivan began to chant over and over, until a submarine crashed through the wall, crushing and killing everyone in the classroom. The camera turned to show a man, a mouth full of worms. He was laughing. Even after Peter broke the television, the images would not leave him alone. Ivan seized control, and then he woke up. Peter described other horrific visions: submarines, an empty pedestal, an empty crib. He remembered a gynecologist's room next to the operating theater where he was worked on. Then he asked Dr. Froon if she was pregnant. She was, but he should have no way of knowing that. Shortly after, Peter was physically attacked by his hallucinations. 60 humanoids invaded his containment chamber and attacked him, bludgeoning him with instruments and strangling him with violin strings. Shortly after, a series of sentences written in Cyrillic appeared on the eastern wall. They translated to, "If you're locked up and I'm a submarine, we'll always have each other. Don't trust them. I didn't mean to hurt you." Peter broke down crying and refused to speak anymore. At this point, the Foundation designated SCP-2956 a level red threat to humanity. There could be no more waiting around. They had to find a way to neutralize it. When SCP-2956 dove down towards the bottom of the Java Trench, the SCPF Faithful attempted to establish contact. The voice that was heard was not Ivan's, but rather that of one of the men who did this to him. "The psychologists have done a lot of work to mentally prep all candidates in our project. You should be able to imagine a room with all your friends adorned with nice paintings and our eternal leader sitting proudly at the center. Your brother will be there as well at some point. You will not be alone throughout all this, Ivan. We have been kind enough to allow you to have some semblance of company, even if it's only psychological. We are not monsters. You always wanted kids, right? That's what everyone wanted. Well, soon you'll be kept occupied by a lovely bundle of joy. But we're still working on that. Obviously, no one is going to give up their own kid for the project." During this communication, Foundation operatives placed a nuclear warhead along with a bath escape, which would allow them to destroy SCP-2956. After the recording being broadcast by the submarine finished looping for a 4th time, a D-class was ordered to detonate the bomb. The bath escape was destroyed along with SCP-2956. It hit the seafloor, and it was still. At the exact same moment, Peter crossed himself, wished Ivan goodbye, and suddenly died. A bust of Lenin manifested where his corpse fell, and then vanished along with the 3 containment specialists in the room. Personnel in the vicinity experienced retinal detachment, decompression sickness, nitrogen narcosis, and even death. Dr. Froon experienced abdominal pain and would later learn that her unborn child had vanished. SCP-2956 was considered neutralized and reclassified safe. Sometime later, a man was found dead in a Tehran apartment rigged with IEDs and a speaker system playing an Arabic remix of Yellow Submarine by the Beatles. There was a handwritten note left on the scene, written in Russian Cyrillic. It read, "Forgive me, for I have sinned. We went against God's will and took a man from his natural shell. We removed charred bones, skin, flesh, everything, and mixed it with cold steel and depth gauges, grew it up in a petri dish, built it up to the real thing. We kept his soul, removed its chance of a place in heaven, and let a machine consume it. The machine churned up his mind, minced and reduced to the point of being completely unrecognizable and childlike. We should have stopped with the peat grinder, the Lada, the Tupolev, the hydroelectric dam, the helicopter, the oil refinery. We put broken men's minds inside of useless, unintelligible. One man was an honest cancer patient. Once he had a wife, took his children to school, sung the anthem. Now he sits there, out on the steppe, letting water in and out to power a city full of drunken Kazakhs. And you know what? Someday he'll let less water in, just to make a point, to piss someone off. Who? Some unknown entity, some ambiguous figure of authority which governs the Kremlin from the shadows. All he can do is stand and stomp his childish feet in that dingy room with Lenin and that baby, both him and Ivan, next to their little paintings. Ivan's still alive, and it pains me. I'm getting his transmissions on my receiver. I know you soulless monsters will find my dead body. So I just want you to know that you failed. You failed. The mind of a child trapped in a metal tomb, sitting at the bottom of the darkest hole on Earth, wanting nothing more than to see his brother and feel life. And the worst bit, he still thinks he needs to finish his job and end the world. End the world he doesn't even know how a nuke works, how they remove cities, burn people alive, gut the atmosphere with radiation, leaving behind nothing but faded shadows against scorched concrete. He's just a child, doing what he's been told. This is my goodbye to everyone, and my wish for forgiveness. Ivan's struggle touched me, and this is my statement against the mess we call the GRU division. I am sorry, Anna. I'm sorry, Yuri. I am sorry, David. Now check out How to Kill SCP-682 Theories and Ideas, and SCP-3108 The Nerfing Gun.